right, let's make sure this volume is working properly. Just a moment here. That's good. Alrighty. Hello, hello. All right, making sure the volume works okay before we jump in and get started. Hello, hello, and welcome to the latest video on my channel. Today we'll build a full stack CRUD application using the latest version of Nextjs, Mongoose, and Mongodb. Basically what we have is a wishlist application that gives us the ability to keep track of our wish list items. To start us out, if we want to add an item, we'll click on the plus mark. And let's just say a new LG TV, need to purchase a new LG TV. And if we select the price, we'll just say that it is $500. And if we gave it a URL, we'll say we'll get it from Best Buy. Currently, we do not have it purchased, so we'll say no. And if we click add item, you'll see that we now have the name listed here in the table. It is not purchased, and we're conditionally rendering indicating that it is purchased. We have a column for the price, and we also have the ability to update and delete a wish list item should we want to remove it as well. So if we want to update it, we'll just click on the pencil icon, and you can see the content is already populated for us. So let's say the price changed on the TV. It is now $550. We still have not purchased it. Once we click on update, you'll see that the price is now $550. And since we already have a Samsung TV listed and an LG TV, let's say that we prefer to have the less or the least expensive of the two. We can delete the Samsung TV. And if we click on the button, we see that it is immediately deleted from the table. That is because we're taking advantage of Nextjs and server-side rendering. This entire application is built using server actions and on the server. The only client-side file or client-side component that we have is the search bar. And the way it works is very simple. We'll just begin to type in the name of an item. And then as the item has the character that we typed, we'll see that the table filters so that we only see the items that begin with the character that we typed. So if we want to type in Sam, we'll see we don't have any items listed as Sam anymore. If we type in new, it's going to show the new LG TV. So if you, and you'll notice as well that the URL is updating. That's because of the way that we are using the search option, and I'll walk you through that from scratch step by step as well too. So if it's something you think you may be interested in building, stay tuned with me. I'm going to walk you through how I built this step by step. Hopefully you find it entertaining, and most importantly, you find something that you can learn and maybe take and add on to your future projects. So with that said, let's get started. So I am going to close out the current terminal that I have running with the project, just to give you an overview. And what I have now is a clean directory that we can install our Nextjs project. So if you're using VS Code, or you feel free to use whatever text editor that you like. But for me, I'm using VS Code. I'm just going to go to the terminal, and I'm inside of the open directory, and you can see it listed here. I'll pull this up a little bit and maybe zoom in a little more. To get started, just type in the command npx create next app at latest space then dot. This is going to make sure that we install it in the current directory, and then we'll press enter. And for this project, it's asking if it's okay to proceed. Just hit OK. Would we like to use TypeScript? I'm going to say no. ESLint, yes. Tailwind, yes. SRC, no. App router, yes. Custom import alias, no. And we'll just give it a few moments to finish installing. Okay, great. And you'll notice that it should be successfully installed. And in the directory, we now have a Nextjs application. And if we click on the package.json, we'll see that we have the latest version of Nextjs 14.2. I think 15 is still in beta. You can run 15 if you like. This should work pretty much almost the same, but I'm just going to use the 14.2 for this particular video. So to jump in and get started, the first thing I want to do is go into the page directory, and let's remove all of the boiler code that is listed within it. And I am going to create a new function just so that we can have something once we start up our server. So let's just type in import React, and this is going to come from React. Then let's create a function that will export name homepage, and we'll go ahead and make it asynchronous because eventually this will be a server-side file, and we actually don't want to do that. We'll send the arrow function and go ahead and type in export default homepage to make sure that we export it. And inside of the homepage function, let's add a return statement. And what we want to return is a div. And inside of the div, we'll just type in homepage. Go ahead and save this file so that once we do start the server, this will be the representative of our homepage. The next thing I want to do is go into the global CSS, and inside of it we currently have the default CSS from Next. We can remove it, and in its place let's just add in a body tag, and let's set the overflow on the Y to hidden. And we'll also do the same thing for the x-axis. So just go ahead and type in overflow x hidden. Let's set the background color. I want to change it to what we saw in the preview, and that background color is RGBA. And we'll type in the number 1725, 40, and then we'll say 0.75. Be sure to save the file, and then we'll add in a little bit more CSS, and then we'll be done. And this is just to set the height of the screen. So we'll type HTML, not hover, body, and we'll go height 100%. HT. No, I'm sorry, that's root. Sorry about that. Root, and we'll set height to 100%, and then let's save the file, and we can close out the global CSS. We won't need it anymore. The last thing I want to do, just from an initial setup before we connect to the database, is to add in a primary, or add in a color that we can consistently render throughout the page. So inside of the tailwind.config file, go ahead and remove the background styling colors that are currently listed there. And in its place, let's add in THBG as a key, And the value that we want to assign to it is RGBA 17. No, I'm sorry. We're going to do for this one, let's do RGBA pound 2D 3748. Yep, and hit save. And what we're doing is we are assigning this variable, this tailwind variable, THBG, the color of, and this is kind of like a grayish color. That way we can have a consistent color throughout the application, and we're not having to retype in this color each place in the app that we want to utilize this color. So we have this. Good job here. Let's go ahead and save it. And I say, well, before we start up our server, well, let's go ahead and start up our server just to make sure everything is working properly. So back in the terminal, go ahead and type in the command npm run dev and press enter. And we'll notice that, at least for me, the project is now starting on localhost 3001, but for you it may be 3000 or it may be a different port. But for right now, let's go ahead and open up a browser and go to this URL and see what we get. So if you want, you can click on, if you're using Windows, you can click on the control key and click on the link, and it should launch it in a default browser. I'm just going to copy it, and I have a browser already open. I'm just going to go to localhost 3001, and we can close this out, and we'll give it a few moments to load. And once it is finished loading, you'll see that the description on the page is now home page, and we're on the root URL. You'll notice that the color of the background is the background color that we set in the global.css, and it is also taking up the full height of the screen. That is because we set the height of our HTML in the body document to be 100%. So great job here. We have the project set up, and we are ready to begin integrating our database. And in this particular project, we're going to be using MongoDB, and we'll be using Mongoose to interact with it. So let's go ahead and begin to set that up next. So back in your code editor or text editor, if you're using VS Code, go down to the terminal, and you'll notice that we have a plus sign on the secondary header that reads terminal. To the far right, we have a plus sign. If we click on that plus, it's going to allow us to open up a new terminal. That is what we want to do at this point, because we want to install a couple dependencies to begin the next step in the project. So now what we want to do is integrate our database with our Nextjs project. And in this project, we're going to be using MongoDB to store our data. And to help us communicate with the database, we'll be using Mongoose to be that, to kind of take care of some of the heavy lifting, so we don't have to write so much of ground level code. We have some built-in protections as we are interacting with our database. So in the terminal, go ahead and type in the command npm for install, and the first package we want to install is Mongoose, and that's MongoOse. And the next package we want to install is MongoDB. Mongoose, again, is what we'll be using to interact, the relational manager to interact with the database, and MongoDB is going to be our database. We'll be using the MongoDB Atlas. So go ahead and click on enter. Okay. And it is finished installing. Let's go ahead and click back on the initial terminal or the original terminal. That way, if we get an error or if something goes wrong, we can see what's being displayed in the terminal. And we'll go back to our browser, and let's open up a new tab, and let's go ahead and go to mongodb.com. So MongoDB is a free database service that you can utilize. The great thing is it is easily scalable, and there are a lot of different options that can accommodate your storage needs. For this project, we're going to be utilizing the free tier. So even if you don't have or can't afford, like me, to pay for a paid subscription, you can take advantage of this as a database that gives a lot of flexibility at no charge. So once you navigate to the site, go ahead and click on the more horizontal or vertical arrows or vertical dots, excuse me. And if you don't have a account, click on try for free. It's going to ask you for some information, and you can feel free to sign in by creating an account, or you can do like I'm going to do and just sign in with Google. So I'm gonna go back to the home page and just click on sign in. And then once you are redirected to the account login screen, you'll just click on Google, because I'm using Google and you can use Google or any other means to log in. So just give me a moment as I type in my information. Now, once you're signed in, you should be redirected to the project overview window. And if you already have an account, it's going to default to the most recent project that you were working on, that overview screen. So in order to add a new project, you'll click on the drop down that is managing the selection of your current projects. If you click on new project, it's going to redirect you to the create a project screen. Go ahead and name the project anything that you like. I'm going to name it my Nextjs. And once you have a name that you would prefer, go ahead and click on next. The next window or option is going to be the permission screen. Just go ahead and keep the default. If you wanted to add someone else to the project to give them full-blown access, this is the window that you'll send out the invite. But for this project, there'll be no one else that'll be added, and I'm just going to keep the default login that's selected here. So just click on create project. After this, we'll be redirected to the overview screen, and from here we have the ability to create a cluster. So let's go ahead and click on the plus mark to do so now. So the first stage in this, after we've created a project, is to create a cluster. And on this window, we want to create a cluster deployment. But before we can create that deployment, we need to set up some standard or some default configurations that's going to let MongoDB know what type of cluster we need for the project. So for us, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to take advantage of the free tier. That is all that we need. You can, if you want to, you can rename your cluster. I'm going to keep it as cluster 0 and probably take this down once the stream is over. But for demonstration purposes, I'm going to keep it at cluster 0. But for you, you may want to name it to something unique, because you can use more than one front-end application within this particular database. So right here, you're going to have the automatic security setup and preload sample data. This may be selected. If it is, go ahead and deselect this. We want to add our own data. We don't want to have MongoDB add any default data into the project. So just make sure it's deselected. We'll keep the same cloud provider. AWS works just perfectly. And it is recommended that you select the region that is closest to you. It is already selected for me by default, but feel free to adjust this based on your current location. Once you are comfortable with the settings, go ahead and click on create deployment. And you're going to be asked to do some security validation. So just hang in here with me on this one. Hopefully I get it right the first time. Yay, I did. All right. So after this, you'll be redirected to the window to connect to a cluster. And this is very important, because this is what we're going to use to connect to our Nextjs application. So now we want to capture a connection string that we're going to store in Nextjs. And then once we store it, we'll build our models, create a function, restart the server, and we should be able to confirm that the integration between Nextjs and MongoDB is successful. But for right now, we need to create a database user. So with this, it is going to provide a default password. I'm just going to keep the default password so that for security purposes, it's already a fairly complicated password, but you may want to make this something a little more unique to you. And you also want to make sure that you're storing it securely so that it can't easily be accessed by someone else, because if they can access it, they can get into your database, compromise your data, and that is not a good user or developer experience. So go ahead and copy the password if you're following along with what I'm doing. And let's head back to the Mongoose. Let's head back to our text editor. And the next thing I want to do for right now before we capture the connection string is let's go to our .getignore file. And what we want to do is add .env to this. That way, when we update this to GitHub, the .env file is not included. So anywhere on this file, go ahead and type in .env. That way, it's not included once we publish to GitHub. You can close out the .getignore. And back in the root directory, let's add a file named .env. And for right now, excuse me, go ahead and paste in the password that we just copied from the MongoDB cluster. And if we go back to it, let's click on create a database user. And just so that we're clear, you're going to be creating a database user that has a username of whatever you had in the permissions without the email. It's going to just capture the username portion of the email, and the password is going to be the password listed here. Go ahead and click on create database user, and we'll see that it is successfully created. Now let's click on choose a connection method. And for our application, we want to connect the MongoDB via VS Code. So before we capture, well, actually, we could go ahead and click on the MongoDB VS Code. And if you scroll down, you'll see that the cluster is still provisioning. So it is not quite ready for us. Oh, there it is right there. So what we want to do now is we want to capture this connection string so that we can store it in our .env file and utilize it to connect to MongoDB. So before we copy it, well, let's go ahead and copy it now. We can copy it now. And let's go back to our text editor. What we want to do is we want to store that connection string in a variable so that when we call the variable, it is utilizing the connection string to create the function that'll help us connect to our database from our application. So within the .env file, let's create a variable with all caps named Mongo underscore URL, and that is MONGO underscore URL. And let's just go ahead and paste in the connection string that we just copied, and we can delete the password that we just added to our .env file. Sometimes it's included, sometimes it isn't. But now that we have this in our .env file, go ahead and save it. And once you save it, you should notice that the terminal is showing the compiled message because it recompiled after we saved. We can go ahead and close this file out. We're done with it for right now. Let's go back to our cluster and we can click on done, and it should redirect us. Oh, I'm sorry. It should redirect us to, well, that's okay. Go ahead on the left-hand side and let's click on database. And from this window, we'll have the option to browse the items within our database. Obviously, right now, we don't have anything stored in it, nor do we have any models built to kind of help organize the data. So let's go ahead and work on building our models first. So back in our text editor, I'm going to bring down the terminal a little bit. Let's add a directory named models. And inside of it, let's add a file name. I'm going to name this Wishlist.js. And what this is going to represent the wish list items that we'll be storing in our database that'll give us the ability to create and add and update. So within this file, what we want to do is create the model that's going to help provide the structure and the organization to our project. So at the top of the file, let's start out by importing Mongoose. And if you've installed the package correctly, Once you type import and you begin to type out Mongoose, it should allow you to hit tab and automatically populate the rest of the data. And then from here, what we want to do is create a function or create the model that we can export, and use throughout the application. So the model is going to be named Wishlist, and we're going to set it equal to new mongoose.schema, and that is a function, or that is a option that's available to us through Mongoose. And within this object, we want to build out the schema for our wish list. So I'm just going to add in item name, and I'm using camel casing. And the reason I chose item name versus just a name is just so that the naming convention doesn't become confusing. And we'll set the type, which is the type of data that'll be stored. This is going to be a string. And we would like for this to be required. We don't want the user to be able to create an item without including the item name. And be sure to set it to required true. That's optional. You don't necessarily have to. It's just a good practice to do so. The next thing that we want is to have a description. And we'll set that type to string. Then we'll want to include a price, and the type of this will be a number. And these are just data storage types to help organize and structure your data as you're storing it within your project. The next field that we want to store is the purchased URL. And we're going to store this as a string. Then we'll include if it is purchased. And this will be stored as a type of string. And this could have been a Boolean. We're going to do this as a yes or no or true or false. But for simplicity purposes, we'll just keep it as a string. And then we also want to be sure that we are capturing the timestamps. We're not going to display the time that we entered it, but it's always a good best practice just to capture the time for record keeping purposes. That way you can have it stored just in case you do want to include it. And then once we have the model or the schema created, we'll need to make sure that we export it so that it could be used throughout the rest of the application. So we'll just type in export default. We'll say Mongoose and .models .wishlist, because that is the name of the schema. And then we'll say or mongoose.model, and then we want to pass in wishlist, and then the second argument will be wishlist. All right, so with that, let's just go ahead and save the file. And then now what we want to do, that we have this model, in order to utilize it throughout the application, we need to establish a connection from our application to Mongodb. And based on the documentation, we just need to create a simple function, and I'm gonna go ahead and do that now. So let's, in the root directory, let's add a folder named lib. And inside of it, let's add a file named db.js. And what we're going to type in this file is a standard function that's going to allow us to communicate with the database and also utilize the models that we have stored in tables, or the schema that we're storing within it. So we'll start, because we're communicating with the database, we know that we need Mongoose. So we'll start by importing Mongoose. Then we'll create a variable name, or name connection. CONNECTION, and we'll set it equal to empty brackets. Then we'll want a async function named connect. And then what we'll say is that if the connection is connected, we just want to return. And what this is doing is we want to do this immediately to say, hey, if there's already a connection, let's just go ahead and keep the connection that's already there. Let's not try to establish a new connection on top of the connection that's already there. So then the next check we want to do is say mongoose.connections.length. If it is greater than 0, then we'll say connection is connected, and we'll set that equal to mongoose.connection. And we'll capture the first connection that's stored within that within the object there, and then we'll set this to connection.ready state. Then we'll say if the connection exists, we'll say the connection, we'll set it equal to 1. If it is equal to 1, then we'll say return. And then outside of that if statement, we'll want to type in await mongoose.disconnect. And what this is saying is that if there is a connection and we do need to disconnect it, then we'll utilize this method in order to do so. And then outside of that if statement, let's create a const named db, which is going to store this, and this is what we'll be using throughout the app. And then we'll say db is going to be equal to await mongoose.connect. And then inside of it, we'll say process.env. And this is where we want to use the environment variable that we just stored, which has the connection string to our cluster. And remember, we named that environment variable Mongo, M-O-N-G-O. Actually, let's just be sure. We can just copy it directly from the .env file. That way we don't make any mistakes. And I'll just remove what I've already typed in and just paste this in. Great. Now underneath it, we'll say connection.isConnected and set it equal to db.connections. And we want to capture the first one and set that to ready state. Great. Now outside of the function named connect, let's create another asynchronous function named disconnect. Function, disconnect. And it will say if the connection is connected, then we want if process.env .node underscore env, and make sure that is capitalized. If it is equal to production, meaning that there is a connection, we want to say await mongoose.disconnect. And then we want to set the connection.isConnected, set it equal to false. And that's all we'll need to type in order to connect and disconnect our application to our database. Now, in order to use it, we got to make sure that we export it. So we'll create a const named db. And we want to destructure or get access to both functions with this one variable. So we'll create, we want to be able to have the ability to destructure it. So we'll go connect and disconnect. And then now the last thing we'll need to do is export it. So we'll go export default db. Now let's save the file. And this should give us the ability to connect to Mongoose or MongoDB outside of our, connect to Mongoose or connect to MongoDB using Mongoose from our application. So for right now, let's just go ahead and stop the terminal from running. And then we'll type in the command npm run dev, or you could press the up arrow. It should bring up the last command that you had typed into the terminal. If you press enter, we'll give it a minute to restart. Okay, and let's go back to our cluster. Okay, we're still connected there, no issues. That looks great. Okay, so with our connection to MongoDB established, let's go ahead and begin to work on the interface of our application so that we can begin to make requests to the app. So we'll go back to, let's adjust this window a little bit so that we can see both side by side. Actually, I'll set this to this way. Give me just a moment. And move this over a little bit. Okay. And we'll just refresh the screen to make sure it's okay. Give me just a second here. All right, so we can close out these files for now. If we run across any errors, we can always bring them back up. So let's start with our home page design. And if you recall, our home page basically just had a header, some additional text, a search bar, and a table with all of our wish list items. So let's start by building out our header. So in the root directory, let's add a folder named components. And inside of components, let's add a folder named UI. And in the components directory, let's add a folder named form. And in that root directory, let's add one more folder named table. Now what this is, these are going to be components that will be within our application, and for organization purposes, I just want to store them in different folders so that we can easily reuse them if need be, or easily capture them or adjust them or make changes as we see fit pretty easily. So the first file I want to add within the header is the first file I want to add is within the UI folder named header.js. And within this file, let's start by adding a component that we can export named header. So we'll import React from React. Then we'll create a const named header. And let's be sure to export it. Export default header. There we go. Now inside of the const, let's add a return statement, and in it we'll add a header tag. And within the header tag, let's just give it a class name just to make sure that everything is working properly, of padding of 6, and we'll give it a border bottom. And inside of it, just add in the words header for right now. And we want to have this header displayed on all pages throughout the application. We could add this to each page that we create, but the Nextjs allows us to take advantage of a file called layout. And basically the way the layout works is that wherever we'll like to have the layout is going to be kind of like the foundation or the root of the application. So whatever we have in that header file or that layout file, we're able to access it in any route that is within the directory that still has the layout. So the easier way to kind of show you how that works is let's create a new layout file, because we already have one within the app directory. Let's create a separate directory within the app folder, and let's name it website, but let's enclose it with parentheses. That way Nextjs knows that this is not a route. This is actually an organization folder. So in the app folder, create a directory named website and be sure to enclose it with parentheses. That way it is ignored and not recognized as a route. And then inside of that page, let's go ahead and drag, or inside of that folder, excuse me, let's go ahead and drag the page.js inside of the website directory. And you should be asked if you want to move it. And once you move it, just refresh the page. And as long as you don't get any errors, then you know you moved it successfully. Now inside of the website folder, let's add another file named layout.js. And this is going to represent, this file, excuse me, is going to represent the layout. And as long as the routes are within this directory, it is going to take advantage of this layout. So in order to create the layout, let's go ahead and look to export it, or create a layout function that we can export and integrate our header within. So let's add import React from React. And then now we'll just need to export a const named layout. So we'll say const layout. And we'll set it equal to, and inside of the parentheses, we want to pass in some data that can be used, that's going to be used to be displayed. And this is going to be the routes. So we want to pass in children. It doesn't need to be capital CHILDREN. There we go. And this is going to represent this. The children will be wrapped with the information that is passed into our layout, whatever we have around the layout, if you will. So within the layout const, I want to add a return statement with parentheses, and we can just add a div, and let's add brackets for children. And let's just see how this works before we integrate the header. So in order to get rid of this error message, we'll need to export layout. And if we save the file, we'll see that it now goes back to the home page as if nothing was there. The cool thing is that if we add in some characters, you'll now see that the characters are being displayed. And let's just say that we want to add one additional route, and eventually we will have a route name. We'll have more routes within the app, but for right now, let's just add a quick simple route so that we can kind of see how this layout allows us to maintain the same structure as we change from page to page. So I'll create a quick directory named edit, and within edit, I'm going to add a file named page.js. And just for demonstration purposes, let's just add React at the top. Let's go const edit is equal to return, and then let's pass in the parentheses, and in it let's just say edit page, and let's be sure to export it. Now if we save the file, and now let's navigate to localhost/edit, because remember with Nextjs, the way the routing works, the routing is based off of the naming convention of the folder, and if you pass in a page.js or route.js, so since this is a user front end page, we'll pass in page.js, and if we press enter, you'll see that we are on the, I just realized I misspelled edit. You'll see that we're on the edit page, but the edit page also has the J's that are within our layout. That is because this layout file is going to provide some structure or wrap the items that are passed within the children. The children are going to be the routes that are within this particular organizational directory. So I hope that made sense. Just wanted to provide a quick explanation of how that worked. So go ahead and remove the J's, and we actually can remove the page.js that's within the edit directory. And for right now, we could just keep the edit folder as is because we are going to need it later on. But if you hit the back arrow, that should take you back to the home page. And if you refresh the page, it should refresh with no errors. Now within layout, let's go ahead and add a directory, or excuse me, let's go ahead and add in the header component that we just created. Oh yeah, my pleasure, Jose, man. Thanks for tuning in, man. Hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to give me a like, brother. Let's go ahead and bring in that header component, and let's not do it like this. The best way to bring it in, let's go to the top of the file, and let's type in import, and we'll type in capital HEA, and you'll notice that we have it's going to automatically populate the items that we have access to within this directory or within the project that begin with HEA. And if you'll notice that one of the options, or the second option, is the header component that we just created within the UI folder. So that's the header that we want to be sure that we import. So once we have it imported, we'll want to integrate it within the layout. So let's go ahead and type in the less than bracket capital HEA, and it should automatically show header. And if we close the brackets, or if we close the syntax, you'll see that the header is now displayed with the word header with the capital H and E. It has the padding that we created, and it also has the border, at the bottom just for style purposes. Great. So if we open the page up, you'll notice that the header is now taking up the full width of the screen. And what I want is to condense this, because this is not a very large project. I want to condense this so that it is more centered and the user doesn't have to look so far to see the items within the wish list table. So the way we want to accomplish this to keep this consistent is by adding a wrapper within the header. And we're going to add it multiple times throughout the project. And this is going to be a reusable wrapper that we will have the ability to use throughout the app and make adjustments as you see fit. So let's go ahead and integrate it now. So in the components directory within the UI folder, let's add a file named box.js. And what we're creating is just a simple little box to store a simple box that's going to provide some simple or consistent padding and margin and layout that we can integrate within the application, and we can reuse it. That way, number one, we don't have to continue to type the same code over and over. Number two, we have a consistent structure, which is a much better user experience. And then number three, it also helps us as developers so that we don't have to continue to write the same code over and over, and we're learning how to create reusable components, because ultimately that's one of the key advantages with Nextjs, is that it gives you the option to write reusable components, which is easier to read, and it is more modular, less time to bundle when it's time to run our application. So within this file, let's go ahead and start by importing React. And we'll create a const named box. And what we want to do, the same way we done with the layout, is we want to pass in children, because we are going to be, this box is going to be wrapping around the children of wherever we like to import it. And then let's go ahead and complete out the arrow function. Be sure to export default this box so that we'll have access to it throughout the app. And just for the demonstration purposes, to make sure that it's working, let's go ahead and add in the return statement. Let's add a div, and just for demonstration purposes, let's add a background color of orange. You can set it to 200 or anything that you like. And within that div, after you've added a class name and a background color, just so that we can see it on screen, pass in the children. That way we have the ability to wrap our code with this box. Save the file, and let's go back to the header. We can remove the header text that we just added. At the top of the header file, let's type in import, and what we want to import is the box, and this is coming from ./box. That's because it is in the same directory, the same UI directory as our header. So if you type that in and hit the down arrow to highlight that box or that line, press enter, it should automatically import it for you. Then within header, let's use that box by typing in the open bracket, capital BOX, and then let's do the greater than bracket to close it out so that you have it displayed like this. And then within the box, let's just type in header, save the file, and you'll notice that we have an orange background with the word header. That's because the box, we set the background to orange, and anything that gets passed within this box wrapper is going to have an orange background, and you'll just see the text on the screen. Great. So let's go back to the box component, and we can remove the background color. And what I do want to add is set the max width of the screen. Let's set it to large, and you can adjust this based on your personal preference. I do want to set the margin to auto. That way the box is centered, because if you don't have this auto added, really quick, I'm just going to add some color just so you can see what it looks like. You'll notice that the header is to the left and not to the right, but if we add MX Auto, it centers it for us, and we can remove the color. I just wanted you to see why we added the MX Auto. Now let's add some padding. So on extra large devices, I want to set the padding on the X axis to 20. On medium, I want to set the padding on the X to 10. On small, on small devices, we want to set the padding on the X to 2. And by default, we just want to give some padding on the X of 4. So if we save the file, we'll notice that the background color is gone, but we now have some padding that's probably a little difficult to see because we don't have much on the screen right now, but we'll add more later, but that's okay. So for right now, we can go ahead and close out the box file. We no longer need it. We can close out the layout file, and we'll shift our focus back to the header. So what I do have within this project is I also have a icon that I got from, I think I got this icon from Canva, but you're more than welcome to get an icon from any Canva. There's some free icon generators out there. This isn't anything necessarily pertinent to the functionality of the project. This is just personal preference, so feel free to add it if you like. I'm going to add this logo and fave icon to the project. So first, let's add the fave icon, and we want to store it within the app directory where the fave icon is already at. And to make it simple, if you just drag your icon once you have it to the app directory, it's going to ask you, it's going to tell you that, that there's already one in the folder. Do you want to replace it? Just click replace. And you're going to see that we now have a new icon there. The next thing I want to do is add a simple logo that I captured. I got that logo, I think, from Canva as well. So with this particular version of Next, we don't have a public directory, but we can certainly add one. And the cool thing is it works the same way. So within the root directory, let's add a folder named public. And then within that public folder, let's just drag the logo that, and I'm gonna make this available if you want to use it, but you can drag your logo that you've downloaded to your computer into this public directory, and then now you'll have access to this logo throughout the application. So for right now, let's just go ahead and remove the header text from the header within the box, and let's start to set up the layout. We'll add a div and give it a class name of flex. We'll set it to justify between. We'll set the width to full. That way it takes up the full space of the box. And we want the items centered. That way they are aligned properly on the x-axis. And then within the div, I want to pass in a logo. But first I want to wrap the logo in a H1. So we'll go H1 class name, and I'm going to set the text to large. On medium devices, we'll set the text to extra large. On large devices, we'll set the text to 2XL, and we'll make the font bold. That way the logo is a little more pronounced. Now I want to store, and if you save it, you'll now see that your border reappears. So instead of hard coding the logo here, I'm going to create a logo component that you can reuse if you wanted to expand upon this project and reuse the logo in different parts of your app. So within the UI folder, which is in the components folder, let's add a file named logo.js. And within the logo, we're going to need a few items in order to bring this to life. The first thing I want to utilize is image. So we'll go import image, and this is coming from Nextjs. Next, we want to import link. This is so that once we click on the logo, we could be redirected back to wherever we want, and we're going to set it to the home page. So next link is going to help us with our client side routing. And then last but certainly not least, we want to import React from React. Now let's create a const named logo. And I'm using the arrow function. We'll go ahead and export default the logo. And just so that we can get something on screen, let's go back to the header and let's import the logo. So we'll go import logo. Be sure to type it with a capital L, and you'll notice that you can get it from /logo because it's in the same directory. And let's just go ahead and bring in that component. Let's hit save. And we don't see anything right now because we haven't returned anything, but as we type out the return, we'll begin to see it on screen. So back in the logo component, go ahead and type in return and add in your parentheses. And then within it, we want to wrap the logo image with the link. That way we can be redirected. So we'll use the less than bracket, and we'll give, we know with links, we have to give an href, and we want to redirect the user back to the home window. Go ahead and close out that link. And within it, let's just give it a little bit of styling. We'll go class name flex and item centered. That is because our logo is going to have an image, and I'm going to add some text, and I want them to be aligned on the x-axis. And within the link, let's take advantage of or use the image component from Nextjs. And with it, we have to give it a few properties. The first thing, we need to set the source. The source is going to represent what image we are displaying, and we want to display the logo that is in our public folder, and all you need to type in is /logo.png. The next thing we want to give it is a alt. In the event the logo doesn't load, we want it to display something to the user, so we could just display logo. Now if we save the file, you'll notice that we are getting an error. That is because with Nextjs, we have to include a width and height property. So for this project, I'm going to set the height to 100. And we'll also set the width to 100. Now if we save, we'll see that we have the Wishlist logo that I have. It's just a simple, I think it was a list icon. Feel free to use whatever you like. And within or outside of the image closing tag, let's add a span. And we'll give it a class name of font. And we'll set the font to light. And I want the text color to be white. That way it shows up and it's a little more pronounced on this darker background. If we close out the span, I'm going to add in the title of Wishlist Haven, which is the name of the site. Just something I came up with. Feel free to name yours whatever you like. And I'm also going to copy this Wishlist Haven, and if you save it, you'll see it is now being displayed within the header. I want to have the, instead of it showing create next app here, I want it to show the name of our website. And the way that we update it is if we go to the app folder and we go to the main layout, the one that was provided by default from Next, we're going to see that we have a title, and this title is being displayed in our tab. So let's just go ahead and delete it, and we can paste in the name of our title. And then once you save the file, you'll notice that it immediately updates. Okay. And we can close out this layout. We can close out the logo. We no longer need it. We actually can go ahead and close out the header because that is cared for as well. And we now have the first piece of structure for our website layout. So now with this in place, the next thing that we want to do is begin to add in the header text, which is just a simple description text that the user will see on the screen once they land onto our page. But before I add the header text, I want to have a different color background, if you will, for that content. That way it is not the same color as the default background of our project. So what we want to do is create a reusable component that we can use to wrap our project with, so that we have the same height on each screen, we have the same padding. That way it's a better user experience, and our overall layout is a lot better. So within the UI folder, let's add a file named page-wrapper.js. And within this file, let's just go ahead and import React from React. And we'll create a const named page wrapper. And remember, we need to pass in children because we will be wrapping content. We're going to use this to wrap the content of the page. And within the arrow function, let's add in a return with a parentheses. We'll add a div. And the key things I want from this div is I want to set the width of the page, the height of the page, and the padding. That way it is the exact same on each of the pages that we're going to create. And we're going to have 3 pages, and we're not having to retype in the same width, padding, and height on each page. So within this div, we'll give it a class name of width full. We'll set the min height to screen, and we'll give it a padding of 4. Then within the div, we will add another div, and well, we won't add a div. We can actually use the box. That way we don't have to add the box and the page wrapper. The page wrapper will wrap the page, and then the page wrapper will also wrap the box. So within this wrapper, let's go ahead and import the box from the UI directory. So we'll go import box. And then within this div, let's just use the box. And within the box, we want to pass in the children. Now, in order to use it, of course, we certainly need to export it. So we'll go export default page wrapper. Let's save this file and we can close it out. Now, back on the home page, let's go ahead and replace this div with page wrapper. And an easier way, or a shortcut way that I usually use this or import my components, is with Next. You can actually just begin to type the component, or act as if you've already imported and begin to type it in. And once you begin to type it in, it should provide the options that best fit what you're trying to type in. So for instance, if you type in the less than sign, and then you type capital PAG and then W, it's going to automatically know, or it's going to automatically suggest that, hey, this is the file, or this is the component that you're probably looking for. And it is. So I'm going to go ahead and click enter, and you'll notice that the page wrapper is now automatically imported. If we close out this page wrapper, let's just type in home page so we can see something. We click save. We notice that we now have padding on the X and Y, and we have the height of our screen set appropriately. That way we have consistency with the home page, create page, and edit page. Great. So let's remove home page and let's replace it with a div, and we'll add a class name. And I want to set the class name to flex, and the direction we want to give it is column. So for each item that's within this column, we want to give it a little bit of space. So we'll set the gap to 6. And if we save the file, we'll notice that we won't have anything listed there. So what I want to do now is create a reusable text, header text, if you will, that we're going to have on this particular page. Again, if you want to expand this project, it's going to be very easy for you to do so and maintain the same typography and layout overall with the project versus having to retype this in. So within the UI folder, let's add a file, and I'm going to name my file, I hit the wrong button there. We'll name it text title.js. And what this will be, this is just text that's going to allow us to reuse the content or reuse the text throughout the application. That way we don't have to continue to type in the same text over and over. So let's start by typing in import React from React. Then we'll create a const named title text, and we'll set it equal to, and I'm just going to pass in some empty brackets for right now. We'll create the arrow function, and let's go ahead and be sure to export default title text. And for right now, we'll go back to the page.js, and at the top of the file, let's go ahead and import that title text. So we'll type in title text, and it should recommend the one, from @components. That's the one that we want. And for right now, let's just go ahead and type in title text. And for this particular component, it's going to be self-closing. So we'll just go ahead and add in the self-closing tag for right now. And if you save it, you're going to notice that we're getting a unsupported server component. That's because we're not returning anything, but we'll correct that in just a moment. So let's go back to the title text file and let's add in a return statement and parentheses. And what we want first is to begin to style the layout of the title text. So we'll add a div to begin with, and we'll give it a class name, and we'll set it to flex. We'll set the items to center. Then the direction will be column. We'll set the width to full. We'll give some space on the Y of 2. And we'll say justify center to align the items in the center. So if you save the file, the error should go away because we're now returning something within the return statement. The first thing we want to pass in within the div is a title, and then we'll pass in a subtitle. The title will be represented by H1, and the subtitle will be represented by a P tag. So the way that we're going to have the ability to dynamically pass in a title and a subtitle and reuse this is the same way, is by utilizing the same prop feature that we use with the layout. That way we can pass in information as children and it could be reused throughout the rest of the application. So what we want is a title and a subtitle. That's what we want to pass in. TLE. And within the H1, remember we said that this will be our title. And within the P tag, remember this will be the subtitle. So if we click save, nothing changes. But if we go back to our home page and we type in the title and we set title will be equal to Wishlist Haven, and I'm just naming it the title of our website. Save, you'll notice that we have the Wishlist Haven being displayed. And if we type in subtitle, you'll notice that, well, let's give it a subtitle first. Let's say your personal Wishlist tracker. Hit save. You'll notice that we have the H1 and P tag on the screen. And the cool thing about this is that we can reuse this in any file, so we don't have to continue to type the same thing over and over. But I do want to add some styling to this title text. That way it looks a little more visually appealing. So within the H1, I'm going to give it a class name. We'll set the text to 2XL. On medium devices, we'll set the text to 3XL. On large devices, we'll set the text to 4XL. And by default, we want the text to be represented or to be displayed in a bold manner, so we'll set it to extra bold. The P tag, if we save the file, let's save it, you'll notice that the text is updated and we can maintain this same consistent format throughout the project. Within the P tag, we'll give it a class name and we'll give this leading relax. This is kind of like using line item, if you will, in CSS, but this is Tailwind way of doing it. And you can customize that if you want, but we're keeping this pretty simple in this project. So now we want to set the color. I'm going to set the color to text gray 300. We'll set the font to extra light, and we'll set the tracking. I want it to be typed. Again, this is just styling. Feel free to make yours however you like. And if you save it, you now notice that the text is updated. So our title text is cared for. So that looks good. And we can go ahead and close that file out. Next up, we want to set the background that will hold our search bar, the create link, and the table. So the first thing I want to do is I want to set the background or make it a reusable component as well. That way we can use this background should we choose throughout the rest of the application. And we will need to use it more than once. And a good rule of thumb is anytime you're using code more than once, you always want to try to condense it so that you're not using it more than once and you can use it in a more efficient manner. So back in our directory within the UI folder, let's add another file named background.js. So within this background.js file, we're going to store a reusable background style. This is strictly styling, nothing pertinent to the core functionality of the project, but just want to show you how I coded this project that we demonstrated earlier and how we really want to take advantage of reusable components and just give it a little bit of life. So at the top of the file, we'll start with React, and this is going to come from React. And we'll create a const named background, and we'll set it equal to, and it'll be an arrow function, we're not setting it equal to anything. But we do want to pass in a return statement, and we'll pass in a div. And before we attempt to use this in a different file, we know we got to export it. So we'll go export default background. Let's just click save. And then back in the home page, let's go ahead and bring in this background. That way we can see it. And I'm going to take advantage of the shortcut this time. Remember, that is the less than sign, capital BAC. You should have the ability to import it from @components/UI/background. Let's go ahead and close this out. This is going to be a wrapping component, if you will. And within the background, let me save this. And we'll put something, that way we can see it as it is being built out. So within the background, we'll want to start with what exactly we're going to be passing into the background. And we know that we want to pass in children. So we'll add the curly brackets of children. And within this div, we actually can go ahead and pass in children now. But the other thing I want to pass in is a class name. And the reason I want to pass in a class name is because I want to have the ability to change the styling of this layout. I want to maintain the color, but based upon the page or where we're looking to use it, we may want to adjust the padding, and the easier method to do so versus trying to create another div and go that route is just to pass in class name. That way you can style it however you like, and you can still maintain the same consistency of this background throughout the application. So children and class name. So now what we want to do is within the div, again, this is strictly for style purposes. This isn't anything you have to do in order for it to work. I'm going to take advantage of a little bit of JavaScript and pass in style. And I want to pass in a custom style. So I'm going to set the background color to RGB A. And it is going to be 17, 25, 40. 0.75, and just be sure to add the closing parentheses and add a comma, and then we'll say the backdrop filter is going to be blur, and we want that blur at 19 pixels, and we'll say saturate, S-A-T-U-R-A-T-E. It's going to be 180%. Be sure to add the closing parentheses and the comma. We'll set the border radius. We'll set that to 12 pixels. Or 12, yep. And then we'll give it a little border. We'll set the styling to 1 pix, solid, RGB, A, 255, and we'll make it 255, 255, and then we'll go 0.125. And let's go ahead and click save. Now you'll see that we have this pronounced background color and the word background there. So now what I want to do is give it a class name. That way we can customize the styling of this and not have to hard code it within this component. So outside of the closing style object, add class name. And for this class name, we're not going to pass in parentheses because we're passing in a variable, if you will. We just want to be able to pass it in directly. And if you use a string, it won't work. So within this, we'll just pass in class name, click save. Nothing will change just yet. That's because we haven't passed the class name to the box component, but background component, excuse me. So let's go ahead and close out the background file, and we'll go back to our page.js. Now we want to pass in a class name so that we can dynamically or customize the styling for this background wherever we're looking to use it throughout the file. So for styling, we'll go ahead and set this one to flex because this is going to hold the search bar and the create button. So we'll say flex, item centered, justify between. We'll set the gap to 8, a padding of 4. I want the background to be the custom background that we added within the Tailwind configuration file. And if you remember, that was THBG. Yep. And we'll say rounded, which is going to care for the border. We'll set that to Excel, and we'll set the width to full. So let's save it. Once you save it, you'll see that we have a little bit more padding here on this particular background layout. That's because we didn't want our search bar and the create button to be so close to the edges, if you will. Now let's go ahead and add in the search bar and the create link button. So the first thing we'll add is the search bar, but that's going to be a little bit more involved in adding in a link. So just go ahead and delete background. And within UI, add a file named searchbar.js. Excuse me. This will be a client-side file because we'll be taking advantage of a couple client-side features in order to make the search work. So we'll start by setting this file or adding the use client notation at the top. We'll need to import React from React. And we'll add a few more items to this particular file. as we begin to create the functionality. But for right now, all we need to do is I want to install Nextjs. So if you go back to your terminal and add another terminal. Okay, yep. In an open terminal, type in the command npm I react-icons. And this is going to be for the React icon package. I want to add in a search icon. And we can close that back down. It's a lightweight package. Once it only take a couple seconds to install, and there shouldn't be any issues with it as long as we typed it in correctly. And let's just make sure that we have it as I say that out loud. You'll see that we have React icons listed there. So great. And you'll see that we also have from earlier Mongoose and Mongodb added as well. So back in the search bar.js file, we want to bring in that search icon. And if we type in import and add the curly brackets, another way that we can tell that the package was installed successfully is that if we type from and then we add the quotations, if we type in React, we should see icons as an option. And there are several different types of icons you can use. For this project, I'm using the FI icons. I just like the way they look a little better. And what we want to do is go back to the brackets and type in capital F and then lowercase I. And then we'll have access to all of the icons that are listed within the FI family. If we type in capital S, EA, we'll see that search begins to come up, and that's the one that we want to import. Now let's create a const named search bar. And we'll create the arrow function. Be sure to export it. And we'll add search bar. Just save the file. Now we'll go back to the page.js. And then we want to import search bar. And that's going to come from add components. And let's go ahead and integrate it to the screen. And it's a self-closing component. And you'll notice that nothing is on the screen because we don't have anything within the return statement. So we'll come back to this file and add a little bit more coding. But for right now, I do want to bring in the custom background that we created because we're going to use that background within this component specifically. So we'll go import background with a capital B, and you should be able to import it from /background because it's in the same UI folder. Then inside of the const, we'll add a return statement, parentheses, and then we'll give it a div. And we're going to have three items within this off the top of my head. So we want to give it some direction so that it is aligned properly. So we'll give the div a class name of flex, set the items to center, width to full, and we'll say justify center. We'll save it. Notice nothing happens. Now within the div, we want to bring in the background wrapper that we created. We'll need to give this a class name as well. And we don't need it dynamic. We just want the string. And we'll say relative. Then we'll say a width to full. And we'll go MX auto. Now within the background, after we've added the class name, so in the first closing tag of the background, not the bottom closing, we want to do an input, and this is where the user will type in their information. So for right now, we'll just type in or create a input tag. And remember, input is a closing tag. Let's give this a placeholder of search so we can see something on the screen. Great. You'll see that we have the background and now the search input is listed there. So let's style it. We'll give it a class name, a width to full. We'll set the padding on the Y to 2. Padding on the X of 1. And you see it coming to life on the screen. We'll set the rounded to large. We want the background to be transparent. And you see that there. And let me close that, sorry. We'll set the text color to gray 300. We'll set focus I think it's outline. Yep, none. Then we'll say focus ring. Yeah, focus ring 2. Yep. Then we'll say focus ring purple 500. Now let's make it 800. And hit save. And that's just customizing when we click on the input what that focus ring looks like. So it's a purple color versus, I think the default is like a gray or a black or something. So this is all we're going to do in this file for right now. Let's go ahead and add the type to text. We'll come back and add the functionality after we've created the CRUD portion of the project. So within the background wrapper, outside of the input closing tag, let's add another div, and we'll give it a class name. Sorry about that. Class name of absolute. We'll set the top to I think 1/2. Hit save. And let's go ahead and add in the icon. That way you can kind of see it a little bit on screen. So we'll go FI search. We'll give it a class name. Actually, with this, we could just go size. And we'll set the size to 20 and close it. And you'll see the icon listed right there. So now let's change it up or style it a little bit. Let's set the right to 4. That's where we want the position to be. You see it there. And we'll go transform, translate, and the translate will be on the Y. I'm going to type it in a little more. Translate Y, and we want that to be 1/2. And we'll set the text color to gray 400. If we save it, you'll see that it is now displayed here on the screen. This will be our search bar. So this looks great. Perfect. So now the next thing we want to do, we can go ahead and close this out for right now. We'll come back to it later. The next thing we want to do is add a link that's going to link us to the create page where we'll begin to interact with the database and test out our functions. So outside of the search bar within the background in the page.js, let's go ahead and import link. And remember, this is from Nextlink. Now back to that same position, let's bring in link and add a href. And we're going to set the href to /create. We haven't created that route just yet, but that's okay. And within this, I want to add an icon just for the user experience and just to help it look a little better. So we'll go import. And actually, you know what? Let me show you a trick. You don't actually, once you've used it once, the icons, Next is smart enough to know that, hey, that's integrated in the project. So you don't have to type in that import after you've done it once already. So we'll add a lowercase. Not lowercase, we'll add a less than sign, and then we'll type FI because we're using the FI icons. And I want to have a plus circle. And you'll notice that we have access to it if you arrow down and press enter, and it'll automatically populate. I'm going to set the size of this to 32. Give it a self-closing tag. And you're going to notice the icon listed within the background next to the search input. So let's give this a class name to style the link, and remember to add the class name to the link, not to the icon. And we're going to set this to flex. We'll set the text to THBG, which is that custom color that we brought in. On hover, I want the text color to be gray 600. We'll click save. You'll notice that the color of it changed, and on hover, it is now changing colors to text gray 600. Perfect. So let's go ahead and set up the ability to create a wish list or add a wish list to the database. So the link that we have is /create. So we'll need to go ahead and create that route. And remember, with Next, we have the ability to set up routes, very front end routes, or in back end too, very easily. So within the organized folder of website, remember the organized folder has the parentheses. Let's add another file named create, which is going to match the location of this href. And within the create route, let's add a page.js. Let's start with the import. And of course, we need to import React. And we'll create a const. We'll name this create page. We'll add an export. And make this create page. And then within the arrow function, add a return statement, a div, and we'll just say create page and click save. So now if we click on this link, what should happen is we should be redirected to the create page. So I'm going to click on it and open it in a new tab. You'll notice that the fave icon is now updated. The title of the page is updated. And if we scroll down, we'll see the header and we'll see that we have a create page. Perfect. So we see the routing is working perfectly, and we tested it earlier with edit, but it's always good to just make sure that it's working. So now we are ready to establish the ability to create a wish list item in the database. So the first thing I want to do before we set up the form and the page layout is let's go ahead and add in the backend capability, the server actions, if you will, to integrate, that we're going to be using to integrate with our database. So within the lib directory in our root folder, let's add a file named action.js. What this is this is going to represent the actions or things that we want to do, or that we're going to make requests, or that we are looking to build within the database. I'm trying to think of my words, the right way to explain it. So action is something that we want to do, and the data is going to be what we get. So we'll start by marking this file as use server, because this is going to be a server driven file. And we're going to need a few things in order to make this work. The first thing we want to bring in is the database connection. And remember, we named our database connection DB. So if you type in import, then DB, it should be the first recommendation. And it should be coming from dot/DB. That is because it is the database function is within this exact same directory. Excuse me. So we can go ahead and press enter, and now we have that database function connect. We have that database function within the file. Excuse me. So next we want to import the model or the schema that we created, and remember we named it Wishlist, and it should be coming from @models. That's where we store the schema. The next thing we want to bring in is import revalidate path. And that should be coming from Nextjs. This is so that we have the ability to validate the data. Remember, we're working on the server. We're not going to be returning this back to the browser. Usually in these projects, if we were working with a normal API and not server actions, and you could do it within server actions too, you can use the return statement where the browser will grab the JSON data and display it onto the screen for the user. But because we're not returning anything to the browser, we just want to make sure that we're validating that data. And then the next thing we'll need is to redirect the user if everything is successful, and redirect should be coming from Next navigation. So if you begin to type in import with the brackets and then within the brackets redirect, be sure that you're importing it from Next navigation. Perfect. So now the first function or action that we want to create is the ability to create a post. So let's create a function named export const, and we'll call this create wish list. and set it equal to async. Remember, this is something that is going to take time, so we need to make sure that we have the async and the wait. And what we want to pass in is the form data, and we'll give it an arrow function. Within the form data, we want to destructure the information from this form data. This form is going to come over as an object. The data will come to us as an object, and we basically want to loop over this object and capture the items that need to be stored within the database based on our schema. So we'll say const open brackets, and we'll set it equal to object dot form entries. And the entries are coming from the form data. So now, actually we didn't need the dot, sorry about that. So now within the const, we want to pass in some information. We will go with the item name because that is one of the fields within the schema that we want to include. And it helps if then we want to pass in the description. Then we'll need the price, purchase, PURCHAS, purchase, URL, and then purchased. I think those are the main fields. And this should be object dot form entries from entry, excuse me. Form data. All right. It helps if you spell const correctly. And let me make sure that these are the correct names. I just like to copy it and keep myself honest. Add it here, comment it out. Item name, description. Actually, we can just copy this. Yep, that looks good. And what I'm doing is, if it's spelled correctly, once we highlight it, it should highlight here as well. Purchase URL, yep, and purchased. Great. All right, so we can delete this. I just want to make sure that I capture those fields correctly. So we can close out that sidebar, or I'll close out mine if you didn't open yours. Then within this, we always want to add try catch blocks. That way, if we get any errors, we know how to manage those, and we can send that back to the user or indicate it on the server. We'll add a try catch block. And the first thing we'll need to do is connect to the database. So we'll say await db.connect. And then after db.connect, we'll say const new wish. And we'll name this wish item. We'll set it equal to new wish list. And we're getting this from the model that we just created because we want to create a new wish list item. Then we'll say item name, description, price, purchased URL, and purchase. Because we're using these items from the object form data to help build out the model, or help build out the information that will be stored within our database. So that is the reason that we destructured it from the object, and we're going to store it within the new wish list variable, because we are using the model to help create the wish list information. So outside of that variable, let's pass in, or let's add a wait, because once we have it, we want to validate it, and then we want to use that variable and the .save method from Mongoose to save it to the database. And then in the catch portion, we want to log the error to the console. So we'll say console.error, and we'll say new item error. Let's keep it like that. And then outside of the parentheses, let's add a plus mark, and then or plus icon, and let's add error. That way we can see the error in the console. And then we'll add throw new error. failed to create a wish list item. Okay, so now let's just hit save, and this takes care of the action. Oh, I'm sorry, we need to add revalidate and redirect. So outside of the try catch block, if all goes well, we want the server to revalidate this data, and we'll go redirect the user back to the home page. Remember, this function is going to be executed on the /create screen. So revalidate the data, check with the server to see if there are any changes, and then if there are or aren't, redirect the user back to the home page. And we know there'll be changes because we are using this in a create function. Great. So let's just go ahead and close this file out, and we can turn our attention to, for right now, creating the form that will interact with our database. And first, I want to style the create page a little bit, then we'll start creating some reusable components. So within the create page, let's go ahead and remove the div, and let's replace it with the page wrapper that we created. That way we have the same layout, and I'm just going to add create page just to make sure it's working, and then you'll see that we have the same padding that we have on our home page, and you'll see it a little better once we set up the edit page, because the edit and create page are basically going to be just about the same. And within the create page, we can remove the create page text. I want to add in some additional page text for just the create and the edit page. So, and we're going to use the exact same approach that we did with our text that we have on our home page, so we make it reusable. So within the lib, no, not lib, within the component directory, where is it? Within UI, let's add a file named page text.js. And within this file, we'll start with import React. And let's just do the, for right now, the same way we did it before. Let's just do the template of const page text is equal to, we'll need to pass in the text because we want to be able to change it based on the page that we're on. And let's go ahead and go export default page text, save it, and we'll go back to the create page, and I'm going to use the shortcut to import it. So that is less than bracket capital PAG and then capital TEX. You'll see that it is now available to import, and we've already passed the prop of, I think it was text, yeah, text to the page text component. So let's just type text, and remember with this one we want to have a string. Let's just say create wish list item, and add the self-closing tag. And we don't see anything on the screen just yet because we haven't added the return statement for styling, but let's go ahead and go back to the page text and add it now. So we'll go return, and within the return we'll add a div. We'll give this div a class name. We'll say items are centered. We'll give it a space on the X of 6. And hit save. I do want to add one more thing here. So I want to add the ability to go back to the home page, and I think the easiest way to do it would just be to add a link with the text of going back to home. So let's go ahead and import link, and this is going to come from next/link. Then within the div, let's use that link, and we'll set the href to /home. And then let's give this a class name of just margin bottom 2. Let's close off the link, and we'll go with back to home. Hit save, and you see we have the text there. Should we make that white? Text white. There we go. That looks a little better. Now outside of this link, let's add a H1 so we can integrate the text. And within the H1, I'm just going to pass in the text that we're passing in as a prop. Hit save. Now we see the create wish list item. And the H1, let's give it a class name of text 3XL. We'll go font of bold, margin bottom 6. Set the text to gray 600. Make that gray 800. And that margin is off just a little bit. Let's set it to, no, that's fine. Let me see something. Let's change that to 5. That's a little better. So now let's just hit save, and we can close out the page text component. And if we click the back arrow, it takes us back home. And if we click the plus arrow, it takes us back to the create page. Perfect. So now what we want to do is create the form that we'll be using to submit the wish list items to our database. And if you recall, what we want to do is create a reusable form. That way it's more modular. We're not having to continue to, copy and paste the same form over and over. For styling purposes, this form should look the exact same. So in your future projects, if you're making a form that you want to be standard and look the exact same regardless of the page that you're on, you may want to consider taking this exact same approach. That way you can reduce some of the code that you're writing, and it will be a better user experience because it'll function a lot better. And just from your perspective as a developer, it'll just be a lot easier on you to make changes and to ultimately customize it as you see fit. So the way I want to do this is, let's go ahead and add a file inside of the folder named form. And if you recall, we built it earlier. It should be in components, and there should be a directory named form. I'm just going to close the UI. And inside of form, let's add a file named form UI.js. And this form, I should have, let me add in the, be consistent, should be a dash there. There we go. And inside of this form UI, what we want to do in here is store the background, if you will, or the layout of our form. That way it is consistent among the pages. And I also want to pass in the action that we just created within as a prop. That way when we use it for a create or edit, we can use that exact same, we can use the exact same UI and just pass in a different action. So we'll start by importing React. Then we'll say const form UI is equal to, remember we want to pass in an action and children. And we'll close off the arrow function, and we'll go export default form UI. And let's go ahead and bring this form UI within the create page. And you could have done this a few different ways. I just chose to do it like this to keep it somewhat simple and to kind of teach how to do reusable components and write more modular, cleaner code, if you will. So within the create page, let's go ahead and import that form UI at the top. And it should come right on up after you type in capital F. And we want it listed, or we want to have it directly beneath the page text. So we'll go form UI. And remember, we want to pass in an action. The action that we want to pass in is the function that we created to interact with the database. And what was the name of that function? Create wish list. So at the top, we'll go import create wish list, and just make sure that you're importing it from @/lib action and pass that into the action, and it should be with a capital C. And when you pass it into the action, when we call or when we click create, it's going to run that function that we created. So we can go ahead and close the form UI, and I'm just going to put a text here just so we can see something. That's right, we need to add some more styling. We hadn't passed the children, duh. All right, so let's go back to form UI, and within this, we want to, first off, let's bring in the background. So we'll say import background so that we can have the same background layout that we have on the home page. And then in the return statement, let's add in background, pass in the children, hit save, and then now you see the background and you see the letter K listed there. That is because we're passing this as a reusable prop. So go ahead and highlight children, copy it, and delete it. And let's add a form. And the form, we'll need to pass in the action. So when the first closing tag of form, pass in action. And we'll need to pass this in with the brackets. So the action will get brackets, and then you'll pass in action. And yes, the form will also need some style. So let's add a class name, and we'll give some space on the Y of 6. We'll make the items centered. Okay, we'll give a padding of 4, and we'll say rounded. Clicks. Well, don't click save just yet. Now go ahead and paste in children, then click save, and you'll notice that the form is the styling of the form is starting to has been integrated onto the layout because we now have more padding. The X or the K, excuse me, is now shifted. Is no longer directly on the edge of the platform or the background. So we can go ahead and close out form UI. And now we have this form UI created, and we can reuse it in the create page and also in the edit page. Now we'll need to add some inputs. But before we add inputs, I just want to style the layout a little bit. Actually, let's add the inputs first, and then we'll add the div for the style. That way you can see it come to life, if you will. So the way we'll add in the form is the form inputs is the exact same way that we created the form UI. So within the form directory, the form folder that we created, and it should be stored within the components directory. Let's add a file name, form input.js. So within this form, or within this file, we want to create a dynamic input that we can use to capture text, numbers, anything that we want to pass into a standard input. That way we don't have to continue to type in the same input styling, and we could just reuse the form input as a prop. So let's start with import React from React. Let's create a const named form input and set it equal to, well, let's create the arrow function first. I keep saying setting equal to, and then let's go export default form input. Save it. Let's go back to the create page, and underneath the form UI, let's import form input, and we can pass in, this prop inside of the form UI, and go ahead and give it a self-closing tag. Hit save, and you'll notice the K disappears, and we no longer see the additional pad. We barely see the additional padding that we just created. So let's go ahead and build out this reusable component. First thing I want to do within the within the const is add a return statement, and then we'll add a div. And within the div, we'll need a label because we want to have a label. That way we can see, the user can see what the input is for. And I'm going to say HTML4. And I tell you, before we do that, let's add a class name so we can at least see it on the screen of block. We'll set the text to small. And let me go ahead and let's close the label so we can see it as we're typing it out. We got to pass in the props. So we'll add in go back to the form input within the parentheses. Let's add in the curly brackets and let's add ID to begin with and label. So the label is going to be dynamically passed in so that we can type in a new label every time we need to use a new input. So go ahead and pass in label within label, click save. We don't see anything just yet, but if we go back to form input and we say label, the first one, which one do we want to pass in first? We could pass in let's pass in the name first. So we'll say label will be item name. And then now we see that on the screen. So now let's go back and finish styling the item name. That way we just kind of see it come to life, if you will. So we'll say font is semi-bold. And we see it change. And we'll set the text color to purple 400. And then now we see that displayed. Perfect. So now we'll need to attach this label to something just for syntax purposes. So let's use HTML4 and we want to dynamically pass in the ID. That way the label knows which input it is associated with. And within or after the closing label tag, let's add a input and give it a closing tag. Let's go ahead and set the placeholder and we want to dynamically pass that in as placeholder, and notice we haven't added it just yet. So let's go ahead and go back up to the curly braces and add placeholder. Click save, and you'll notice that we don't see anything there. We see a placeholder, but we don't see anything within it. That's because we haven't assigned it a name just yet. So within the create page, inside of the form input, let's pass in the placeholder for name. And I think that we can just name this one name and be just fine. So we'll go placeholder, name, add 3 dots. So now we see the name now listed within the placeholder. So let's go ahead and style it. And I'm going to keep the style the same for the input. You can dynamically pass this in as we did with the box if you want to customize it a little bit. But the point of this for me is just to keep the same style. So I'm going to add a margin top of 1. We'll set it to block. Set the width to full. We'll say rounded large. And that should care for the border. Yep. We'll set a shadow of small. We'll set the focus to THBG/5. We'll set the focus ring to THBG. Yep. Ring, and we'll give it a little padding of 3. Set the background to THBG/50. 50. Yeah, 50 is nice. That works. And then we'll set the outline to none. Okay. All right. And yeah, that'll work. Actually, I'll set this to purple 500. Yeah, that'll work. All right. We'll set the outline. I don't like it. Sorry. There we go. All right. And next up, we'll need to add in some additional information. So we've cared for the styling. We'll need to add some additional information for the functionality. So we know we'll need to pass it a name. This is going to represent the name of this input. So when we loop over it in the server action, the action will know what's the name and what to assign it to the wish list schema. We'll need to pass in type because we're going to have a type of text, but we're also going to pass in a price, which will be a number. So we want to be able to control that. We can type in required as well as a good best practice. And that just denotes that, hey, this is a required field. And we'll also want to pass in item, but we won't use that. I'll tell you what, let's go ahead and delete item for right now. We'll come back and add item later. So now within the input, let's add in the information so that we can utilize it within as a prop. We'll set the ID to ID. We'll set the name to name. Set the type to type. And we'll set required to required. Uh-oh, sorry, I saved it before I typed in required. There we go. Once we click save, that's going to care for this file for right now. We'll come back later and add an item when we want to dynamically display this within the edit form as well. So we can go back into the create page.js for right now. And let's begin to add in the input for name. So we'll set the name will be equal to item name. Remember, that's what we named the field in the database. We'll set the type to text. We'll set required to, well, we just set for this one, we'll just set required. And then the label, well, we already have the label. So we got the name, the text, the placeholder required. Perfect. So we can hit save. Next up, we want to add in and we're going to add more inputs. Like I said, we're going to need one for the price and the placeholder or the purchase URL. But let's go ahead and add a reusable text area component. So within the form directory, let's add a file named text or form-text-area.js. And we'll import React from React within the file. Oh, and I'm sorry, please be sure to add this file within the form directory that's within components. And then within this, we'll need to create the const name form text area. So we'll say const form text, and we can just keep this one small. And we'll create an arrow function. Go export default form text area. Hit save. Now let's go back to the create page, and I'm going to import it the shorthanded way. Feel free to import yours however you like. I'm just going to go form text area. Hit save. Right, and nothing happens just yet because we haven't passed anything to it. So very similar to what we did with the input. Let's go ahead and add in a return statement. Let's give it a div. We'll go with label. Let's pass in label first, and we'll pass in ID. So within the label, we'll say HTML, oh, not hidden, HTML4. This is going to be for ID. Let's give this label a class name of block. Actually, let's pass in label first so we can see it on screen. And go back to the create page, and let's go label inside of the form text area. Let's go ahead and type in label, and we'll say label is description. Hit save. So now we see the label on screen. If we go back to the form text area, let's continue the styling. So we'll go text small. We'll go font semi-bold. And we'll go text purple 400. And, you know, we honestly could have made this styling a reusable component as well. In future videos, I will be very particular about creating more and more reusable components, but I think this is a good start for this particular video. And then now we want to add in the text area after the label closing tag. So we'll go text, HTML tag text area. And this will be a self-closing tag, and then we'll hit save. And then you'll notice that we have the text area block on the screen. So let's just go placeholder, and we want to pass in a placeholder. And be sure to pass it in as a prop. Now let's go back to the create page, and let's pass in placeholder, and we want to give it the name of description. Hit save, and now we see it listed there. I'll just change it from saying description to information about your wish list item. Okay. All right. And we'll go back to the text area, and let's style it first. We'll go class name, margin top of 1, and set it to block. Set the width to full. Set the border to gray 300. Rounded. We'll go large with this one. Shadow we'll set to small. Focus will be border THBG/5. Focus we'll say ring. THBG/5. We'll set the background. Yeah, I'm gonna change that THBG/90. Save. That's better. And we'll say outline. Outline I'm gonna set to purple. I think it was 400. Okay. Actually, I'm going to go back to the text input. And honestly, we should be able to just copy this for the most part. Close it out. And I'm just going to paste this in. There we go. Just to keep it consistent. Nice. All right, so that cares for the description. Now we'll need to, well, the styling of the description. Now we'll need to pass in the dynamic information that we want. I'm gonna add rows just in case you want to change the size of yours. And we'll have label, ID, and we'll pass in the name as well, sorry. Okay, so now within the text area, we'll set the ID to ID. We'll set the name to name. Rows will equal rows in the event you want to adjust the row size. And for right now, that'll be suffice. So just go ahead and click on save. And if we go back to the create page, let's add in the additional information for the text area. So we'll say the ID is equal to description. The name is equal to description. Want the rows set to 4. Feel free to set yours to however many you like, just to give it a little bit more space. And this is label description. And we already have it. Duh. Click save. All right, that should take care of that. And what I want is to have a 2-column layout on large devices versus having everything listed in a row. Strictly personal preference, nothing relevant to the functionality. So I'm going to copy the form text area and form UI, delete it. Make sure I copy the whole thing. No, wait, it's going to be within. So yes, that's right. Copy the text area and form input and leave the form UI. And then add a div, and we could paste it back in just so we don't mess it up. And then within the div, and I click save, you'll notice that it reduced some of the padding once you put it in the div. Just click, inside the div, just add a class name, and we'll set this to grid columns. On small devices, I want it to be 1 column, and on medium devices and larger, I want it to be 2 columns. So we'll say grid columns 2, and we'll set the gap to 6. Hit save, and you'll see that we have the 2 column grid layout on medium devices. Perfect. So let's click save, and now what we want to do is add the input for the price and purchase. So we can just copy this div, just the top tag, and underneath this div, let's add another div, and this is going to represent the second row of content. Paste in the div with the class name that we just created because it's going to be the exact same information. Now we can just add a form input. Go ahead and give it a closing tag so React isn't upset with us. We'll set the ID for this input to price. We'll give it a label of price. We'll also add a type of number. And you'll see that there now. Perfect. Then we'll give it a placeholder of what's the cost? A question mark. And I think last but certainly not least, got to give it a name, and we'll give it a name of price. Perfect. So now we have our price input. Next up, we want to add an input for the purchase URL. So we'll go ID of PURCHASE URL. We'll give it a label of purchase URL. We'll set the type to a string. And you could have made, or type the text. We could have made this URL just, and it would have gave some built-in validations, but the string is fine. And we'll give it a placeholder of Wishlist item URL. And then we'll give it a name of purchase URL. Perfect. And if we expand it out, we see we have another column there. Great. So now next up, we want to add the select option so that we can select whether the item is purchased or not. So back in the form directory, let's add a file named formselect.js. And this will be the file that stores our select input so that we can select, or we can select yes or no whether we've purchased the item or not. So we'll start by importing React. Then we'll say const form select, which will be the name of this function. And we'll go ahead and create the arrow function now. And we'll say export default form select. Hit save. Then let's go ahead and bring it into the form. And for this one, outside of the div, let's go ahead and I'm going to take the shortcut approach to bring in the form select. So we'll go ahead and begin to type in form select and select the appropriate one from the drop down. Give it the self closing tag. And then now we can go back to the form select function and begin to build it out. So we'll add the return statement. And within the return statement, of course, we want to start with a div. Move that over a little bit. There we go. And we'll start by bringing in an ID and the label. So within this div, we'll add the label just as we've done before. And we'll say HTML for, and we'll pass in the ID, and we'll give it a class name of block, text small, font, semi-bold, and set the text to purple 400. And sorry, I should have put that on screen. Let's pass in dynamically the label. Go back to create, type in label, and for this one, I think the best option would probably be just the name purchased. You can name it whatever you want. And if we click save, we'll see that we now have purchased listed on the screen. Perfect. Now outside of the label, now we want to add in a select. So I'm just going to use the select. Uh-oh, it helps if I go underneath the label and type in select. And within select, we'll need to pass in some information. So let's just go ahead and add it now. So we need ID, we need label, we're going to need the name, we'll need options so that we have the option to select either yes or no. And for right now, that'll be all that we pass in. We'll pass in a little bit more later. So we'll go ahead and style this first. We'll give it a class name. And I'm again just going to grab the same styling from the input. And I'm actually just going to copy the entire class name and replace this class name that has an empty string with the one that we just copied from the form input. Click save. And now you see we have this option or this select option listed here. Perfect. And within select, let's just go ahead and pass in the dynamic data. We'll pass in the ID, set it equal to ID. Name will be equal to name. We'll add we already have the class name, so we actually can just leave it as is for right now. And then what we want to do next is we want the ability to loop over the options that we create. So the user has the ability to select the option based on the drop down that we've created. So the best thing to do is to not hard code it right here. We'll actually code the options in the actual field itself or in the prop itself in the create page, but we do want to loop over and create an option. So we'll say options.map because we're going to be passing in options as a prop to this. And then we'll say we need another bracket or parentheses within the initial parentheses. And for each of the options, I'm going to name it option. And we want to create a drop down option. And the name will be the actual label. So we'll say option.label. I'm sorry, the label that we haven't created just yet. And we're going to get an error because we haven't created it just yet. And that's okay. But we'll create it in just a second. So inside of option, go ahead and add in a key. And the key is going to be option.value. And we'll create that in just a moment. And we could actually go ahead and click save and just save this file. Now let's go back to the create page and let's set up the options or finish out the form select, I should say. So we already have our label. Let's add an ID. And the ID is going to be purchased with a lowercase p. And let me just make sure that's how we named it in the model, because we'll get an error. And with a ed, yep, purchased. So we'll do that. We'll add a label, the ID. We'll set the name to purchased, P-U-R-C-H-A-S-E-D. Now we need to add the options. And remember, we could pass the option, well, we are going to be passing the options in as a prop. And what we basically have is an array of objects. So we're going to say the first object is going to have a key of value. And we'll set it to an empty string. And the label will be, we'll make the label select purchased. So we'll just say select. I'm not going to be too fancy with it. And then now you see the error goes away because we're passing in the options, and you see the option listed there. Perfect. So now let's add another object, and we can actually copy this one and just change it. So the first, and this should be is that a lowercase? I can't really, yeah, that is lowercase. So the first value is going to be yes. And instead of an empty string, and the label for that value is going to be yes. So if we click save, we go over, we see we have select and yes. And then the last one is going to be no. And then we'll change it from, we'll change it from select to no. And then now if we click the drop down, you see we have yes and no. Perfect. Okay. And we already have that there. So the last thing that we need, and this is what our form looks like. The last thing that we need in order to make this, to bring this to life, is to add a button. And the button will be to submit the request. And I'm just going to name it add item, or label it add item, I should say. And we could have made this a reusable prop as well, but for what we're using it for, it's okay. Let me see something. There we go. I'm just going to zoom out so you can see it a little better. Perfect. Sorry about before. I'm going to set the type for the button to submit, and give it a class name. I'm going to be a lengthy one, so just hang in there with me. Set the width to full, a padding on the X to 4. We'll set the border, and want the border to be transparent. We'll set the text to purple 400. Let's just set the background to, what about white? Yeah, let's go with gray 400. Still a little tough to see that. I think I'll make it gray 900. Perfect. We'll set the font to semi-bold, and we'll give it some padding on the X, give it some on the Y now of 4, and then we'll set rounded to large. And then on hover, we'll set the background to slate 900. Hit save. Let's make it slate 300. So it's 500. So there we go. All right, so this should actually work. So what we have, just to do a quick recap, we have a form input that we've created reusable components, and we are passing in the information, we're passing in the action that we created to create a wish list item, and we have inputs with labels and names that distinguish which input is for which item in the schema. So let's just test it out. So I am a sneaker fan, so I'm gonna say Jordans 11, new retro, well, retro Jordans being released soon. What's the cost? I don't know. We'll say $250. And the wish list, we'll say Foot Locker. Purchase, no. Let's click create if all goes well. If not, we'll get an error and then we'll be able to dissect it from there. And we got an error. So let's see. If we look in the console, it says that failed to create it the ready state. So I wonder if we have any issues with our connection string. Let me do this. Let me log the error. I think I did console.error. Yep. So we know we'll get an error. I'm just gonna put something in just to recreate the error. Failed to create the action. Yeah, ready state. So this means that I need to double check the connection to Mongodb, and that is in DB file. So we're going to look at it real quick. Const connection. Yep, that looks good. If there's a connection that is connected. Mongoose dot length. Yep, connections greater than 0. So I tell you what, I actually have a repo that has this string stored in it. Let's just copy it, because this is just a database connection that you can copy from the documentation. I just want to type it out so you can see it, and I may have made an error. So we'll say Jordan 11 release of retro Jordans. DNS. We'll set the price to 200. Foot Locker, I suppose. If it is purchased, no. Add item. We notice that we don't get an error, which is great. And if we go to our MongoDB cluster and just reload the database really quickly and click on Browse Collections, perfect. You'll see that we now have the Jordan wish list item that we added inside of the database. Perfect. So we have the ability to create. We see that our form is working properly. Now let's go ahead and add the ability to display this data, and we can also take care of the search option as well while we're at it. So let's go ahead and take care of search and get data at the exact same time. So the first thing I want to do is within the lib directory is add a file named data.js. And this file is going to represent the GET request so that we can get the data out of our database. And I'm also going to integrate the ability to search, and I'll talk you through that as well, because what we're going to do, we're going to kill two birds with one stone. We're going to set up the search capability, and then we'll also add in the table. That way we can display the information and search from it at the same time. But first things first, let's create the function to get the data. So within this file, this is a server file, so we'll start by marking it as use server. And then we'll need to import the wish list model, because that's what we'll be using to gather the data. And we absolutely have to have the database connection. And we'll go ahead and import it. Then let's create a export const named get wish list and set it equal to async. And we'll need to query. This will be for the search option. If we weren't integrating search, we wouldn't pass anything in, but because we are, we want the ability for the user to search the request, or every time we make a search, we're actually making an API request, and we want to pass in the query from the user. That is the reason that we have to pass in query to the function, and we pass it in as an empty string because that is the initial value. But as the user types in information in the input field, then it will begin to search based on the characters that are being sent to it. So I hope that made sense. It'll make more sense as we integrate the search feature. But let's go ahead and close up the arrow function. And of course, anytime we are interacting with the database, we want to establish a try catch block so that we can catch any errors. And the first thing that we'll need to add within the try catch is the connection to the database. So we'll go db.connect. And so let's just do this. If we just wanted to get the items, this is what we'll do. We'll say const get items. We'll say get items. We'll say const items is equal to await wish list, and that is the wish list model that we just imported. And when we include the dot, we get the methods from Mongoose, and what we want to do is find, and we'll click save. And in this instance, we actually are returning the items back to the browser. And if we click save and we go console.log and we'll go error and plus mark the error, and then we'll go throw new error. We'll say failed to get wish list items plus, and then that way we can dynamically see the error because it came in handy the last go round. This is what we would do if we were just wanting to get all items, but because we want to query the items for the search by the user, we need one additional step. So we're going to create a variable named search query, and we're going to set it equal to query if there's a query. A little bit of dynamic JavaScript. We want to destructure some information from the item name. And if you wanted to search by price, you can include price. You could include yes or no if it is purchased or not. But just to get us started, I'm just going to do the item name, or search by the name. So we know the name is item name. So I'm gonna go ahead and use that. That way it is consistent and it knows what we need to be searching through. And we'll set the item name to $regex, and we'll say query, and we want to query the options of I. And if we don't get anything, then we just want to pass in a empty array. And I'm getting the error. I think I left off that's right, this reject is supposed to have its own reject. I think I need to come out of one more. And we actually don't need to pass this one. Sorry, just get my syntax right. There we go. And then now what we want to do is pass in this search query and define. That way, if there is no search query, we pass in the empty brackets. And if there is a search query, we pass it into the defined method, and we're going to search the item name based on the query from the user. So let's go ahead and save this file, and provided I didn't make any typos, it is ready to go, and we can close it out. Now let's go back to our page.js, and that should be in the app folder, in the organization folder named website page.js. And we want to add in a dynamic table, not a dynamic table, but we want to add in a table that will display the data from the database. And staying consistent with how we have coded the rest of the project, we're going to break this table down into reusable components. So the first thing I want to do before we kind of dive into that is let's just go ahead and add a background, because remember the table is going to be displayed on a background similar to this. So we'll just go ahead and create another background wrapper, if you will. And we'll give it a class name of, and make sure it's a string, padding of 6 and a shadow of large. We'll click save, and you notice that we now have it listed there as well. And within this, we want to create a table to display that information. So let's go ahead and begin to integrate it now. So in the root directory, inside of components, inside of table, let's go ahead and add a file named itemtable.js. So this itemtable.js is going to work very similar to the form UI, where we'll have the ability to, the first thing will be kind of like the wrapper, if you will, or the actual table itself, and just kind of giving it some structure. So we'll go import React from React, and we'll say const item table is equal to children, or it's equal to, and it'll be an arrow function, but we know that this is going to be a prop, so we'll have to pass in children. And then let's go ahead and export it. Export default, and we'll say item table. Click save, and we'll go back to our home page, the page.js file, and we want to bring in the item table. So I'm going to take the shortcut and less than capital ITEM. And once you type in TE, you should have the ability to import it. And this is going to be a wrapper prop, if you will. So we're going to pass information inside of this item table. Click save. We don't really see anything just yet. We need to add a little more information inside of the item table, particularly a return statement in the table. So back in the item table file, let's add a return statement with parentheses, and we'll go table and give it a class name and a width of full. We'll set the text to small, and the text color will be gray 300. We can close this and pass in children as a prop. Hit save. We don't see anything just yet because we haven't actually added a header, but trust me, it's there. So go ahead and close out the item table. And the next thing we want to add is the table header. So within the components folder, add a file named tableheader.js. And we'll start by importing React from React. And it will say const table header is equal to, and if we had more than one table in our project, I would pass this in as a prop. But because we only have the one table, I'm not going to worry about making this header with different table header details, or row, or table header row, so that you could change the name, because the name is going to be the same. It just didn't make sense. So let's go ahead and export the table header. Hit save, go back to the page.js, and we can just import the table header and give it a self-closing tag, because there isn't going to be anything passed into it. So inside of the table header, let's add a return statement. And within the return, we know we'll need a table head. And we can hit save there. I'm going to give it a class name of background THBG. Set the text to white. And within the table header, you know we need a row, and the row is going to hold the individual header information for our table. And we could have made this an array, but the reason we didn't is because some of it is slightly different when we style it, you'll see. But we'll just add a table header, give it a class name, padding a Y of 3, X of 4. We'll say rounded, and I'm gonna set this to table left, because I want the left edge to be rounded. So that's table rounded dash table, and I gotta add this, sorry. And be sure to add that the sizing of how you want it rounded. I'm gonna give it a border bottom and set the border to gray 700. We'll make the text centered. And we'll set this one to name and hit save. And now you see we have name displayed on the screen. And these next two are going to be the exact same. So we'll say table header, class name, padding on the Y of 3. We actually can copy most of this. The only thing we won't do is center the text, and we'll remove the table left. So I'm going to copy this, paste it in, remove the rounded table left, and just keep the padding on the X, the Y, the border bottom, the text gray, and we'll do text centered. And this one we want to display purchased. Perfect. And we can just copy this and paste it underneath and change this from purchase to price. And then last but certainly not least will be actions, and this is going to be a little different, but we can adjust. We'll change this to actions, and we'll set the border how we have it rounded here. I want to round this one, so I'm just going to copy it and paste it in. And instead of it being rounded on the left, the table left, I'm just going to change it to table right, hit paste. And now the right corner is rounded. Perfect. So we can go ahead and make sure you just save this file, close it out. Now the actual most important part of this table, which is the body, which is going to actually display the data. So let's go ahead and do this. We'll need to make some modifications to our home page as we bring it in. So we marked this, if you recall, as a asynchronous file because it's going to run on the server. What we want to do is pass in search params. And what search params is basically just going to capture what the user is entering from a search perspective. And we want the ability to store it in a variable. I'm just going to name it query. So we'll say const query is equal to search params. If we have any, we want to query the database and send that request, and we're going to send it to the table body, and you'll see how we do it in just a moment. Otherwise, if we don't have a query, we just want to pass in a empty string. So now the next thing we want to do is gather the table data, or gather the wish list items from the database. And the way we want to do that is the same way we imported the action. So we'll go to the top of the file and we'll say import and brackets, and then we want to import the name of the get function that we just created inside of the data.js, and we named the function get wish request. So we can close this out for right now. Inside of the curly brackets, go ahead and type in lowercase g for get, capital W for wish, and it should come up. So all you need to do is just import it, save it, and then now we'll go back inside of the home page function, and let's create a const named wish list and set it equal to await get wish list, which is calling this function. And again, if we weren't, and because we are integrating a search bar, go ahead and pass in query, click save. And then now we are ready to display or begin to build out the ability to display the table data inside of the table body. So we'll need to create a new file within the table folder named table body.js. And inside of this, we'll go ahead and start by importing React from React. And we're going to have a few different items within it, but let's just get something on the screen. Let's say const, if I spell it right, table body is equal to, and what we want to pass into this body is the wish list And that is this wish list. Let's make this a lowercase w, sorry. That is this wish list variable that is storing the query. So we want to be sure that we're passing that in. So we'll say wish list, complete out our arrow function, and let's go ahead and export it. And we're going to export the table body. Click save. And then now let's go back to the page.js, and we can import this table body. We'll take the shortcut. So underneath the table header, go ahead and begin to import the table body as we've done. And before we close it, let's go ahead and add wish list. And inside of wish list, we're going to pass send wish list, close the tag, click save. Nothing happens just yet, and that's cool. But you're going to see it start to populate as we build out the table body. So we actually can close out this page.js. We shouldn't need it anymore in the project, but if we do, we can always reopen it, and we'll shift our focus to the table body. So the first thing I want to do, because this table is going to have the ability to edit and delete wish lists, let's just present it on the screen. Excuse me. Add a wish list and make sure the search query works as we design. So within this return statement, let's add a T body, which is the HTML tag. And let's go ahead and list, sorry, make sure I spelled that right. I just caught that. And wish list. Wish list, WHIST. Okay, sorry about that. Just make sure you spell wish. I mean, it wouldn't have mattered because the names match, but I just would rather keep it consistent. So within the table body, the first thing I want to do is display a message in the event there are no wish list items in the database. So we know we have one, but let's just go ahead and delete it for right now. So I'm gonna go back to our MongoDB database, and I'm just going to delete this item. That way we can make sure that we're getting our message, and then we'll add a couple more in a moment. So let's say within curly braces, because we need to pass in a little JavaScript inside of this JSX, we'll say wishlist.length, length, is equal to 0. If it is, we want to pass in a table row with table details, and I'll say class name call. We want to set the span. We'll say call span 4, and we'll say give it a little bit of padding on the Y of 4. We'll set the text to center, make the text gray 400. And we'll just tell the user that no items in your wish list. And we're getting the error right now because we haven't finished out the JavaScript. So we'll go ahead and finish it out now. That way we're not getting the error. So in the event that there are, I'm just going to pass this in and just hit K so we can get something on the screen and no error. It should have displayed something. Let's see, why is it not displaying here? Wait a second. Let's just go ahead and finish this up first, because I think I may need to finish it out before it actually shows. So let's do this. So remove the div, or if you added the brackets, the name of it is escaping me right now. Just delete it. So go ahead and just type in wishlist.map, and we just want to map over all of the wish list items, and I'm just going to name it item and give it an index as well. The index will be for the key, and you could have went item.id, and the item is for the actual wish list item. I just want to do index. It's purely up to you how you wish to organize it. So within this, I'm going to give it a table row for each item we want to create a row. And the row will start with a key of index, which is the ID. And then we'll give it a, outside of that bracket, we'll give it a class name for styling. We'll just say hover background gray of 700. And then within the table row, we know we'll need some table details. So the first detail will be the item name. So we'll go item.item name and click save. Then we'll say, we'll need to give this some styling, so we can just go ahead and style it, and we can probably copy the same styling over. So we'll say padding on the Y of 3, padding on the X of 4. We'll say border bottom, set the color to gray 700, and set the text to center. Hit save. And we can just copy this because we're going to need to use it again. The next field is purchased, and remember, with purchase we are dynamically displaying the information, so we could just go ahead and paste in the item name again, hit save, remove this, and let me see something here. Wishlist. Okay, and go back to my page.js. Wishlist. Let's get wishlist. And let me see something. Let me test this out. I'm just gonna put some information. Sorry, I want to test something out here. Okay, this function isn't working because we should have seen that we didn't have any information. So let me go back to our data and let me make sure I didn't type anything in incorrectly. Yep. So we have the database connection. Search query is equal to the query. Passing in the item name. And yep, query. And if the options, we'll set the options to I. Otherwise, we'll pass in the empty string, and then we'll await the connection. It should be returning items. Okay, so that looks good. So let me just comment this out to see what I get. Save it, refresh it, and it is not displaying. Need one moment here. Let's troubleshoot this a little bit. Make sure it is stored in the database. Yep, we see it there. And let's take a look at this. Search query. Let's go back here. That's got to be a wait, Jason. Sorry about that, y'all. I just put DB connect. If you caught that, good job. It's got to be a wait because you're awaiting the connection. Now if we go back, it's still not displaying the wish list there. Let me see, what am I missing? Items, await DB connect. Remove this query too. Okay, and console.log error is not giving the error or anything. I know we're connected. It's just not showing. All right, let me go back to the table body. Nope, there's nothing there. Page.js, table body, passing in the wish list. Let's just move this query too. That's odd. In the wish list from data. Give me a second here. equal to 0. That looks good. If it's not equal to 0, we should be mapping over item.name. Yep, all of that looks good. Let me break this down a little bit to see why it is not displaying. Table row, data. Yep. Let me do this. I'm going to remove that portion and just say wish list dot map item index, and instead of displaying the message, we'll just go with table row and table data, and I'm just gonna go item dot name, no, item name. Yep, I know you need a key, and oh, this goes in the row key index. Still not showing the actual data from the table body. Alright, and we have that. Let me go back to this function. So console.log items. Okay, so I see the item from the database and it is being returned, but for whatever reason, this page isn't capturing it. So are we getting it on the front end? Let's see. Console.log front wish list. Put a space there so I can see it a little better. Front wish. Yep, we're getting it there. So now the question is why did I misspell something? And go back to the table body. So we're getting it, it's just not displaying it in the table. So maybe we'll change the approach and try this one more time. Let me see, I am going crazy. We'll say wishlist dot length, length. If it's equal to 0, we'll pass in a table row with some data, just to keep it simple. No items in wish list. If it is not, then we'll say or. We'll go wishlist.map item index, and that shouldn't be throwing an error either. I'm going crazy today. Let me remove this. Actually, I don't need to pass JavaScript there. It's wishlist.map item and index, And we'll say table row. Give this the key with the index. Then we'll say table data item dot item name. And it is item name. There's the ID. Oh gosh, I am really drawing a blank. So I tell you what, let's try this. My prop is acting up, so we'll go T body, and let's try to just copy this directly from here. Nothing there, nothing there. It's coming from the back, and we're getting it from the front. We'll say wishlist.map item index. Then we'll say for each one it is a table row, table data, say item dot item name. Hit save. Okay, so it's working. So I'm wondering why was the prop not working? Let me go back. Table header, T table body, wishlist. Hit save, and it's not there. That's so crazy. I am not sure why the prop of it is not working. But it's okay. Nevertheless, we'll just hard code, not hard, but we'll just code this one in. I am really drawing a blank right now. I'm not sure why it's not, but it's okay. So let's just go back to the page.js. We can remove that. And if we hit save, we see that we now have EE there, which is the name of the item in our database. So we know that it is working, and we saw it in the console, and we saw it from the front end and the back end, so it was passing properly. It's just maybe I'm typing something off with my table prop, but it's okay. We'll just hard code this one in, no big deal. It still works as designed. So let's just finish it out. So for the table row, we're going to give it a key of index, and we'll give it a class name of hover. Set the background to 700. Oh, it helps if I have a class name there. The class name, hover BG gray 7. Should do 600 is fine. Okay. And we'll give the data a class name, padding on the Y of 3, padding on the X of 4. We'll go border bottom, and I want the border to be gray 700, and set the text to center. Hit save, and you see that we now have the name listed there. So let's go ahead and copy this, and we'll paste it in again. Now we want to create the display of purchased, and remember, we are going to conditionally display this, and the way that we'll conditionally display it is we'll add a span, and then we'll give this span a class name of, actually we need to pass it in with brackets because we want to use some temporal literals to dynamically pass it in. So the first portion is going to be the standard size, and then I'm going to show you the dynamic in a minute. So the standard will be the padding on the X of 2, padding on the Y of 1. We'll set the text to white, and we'll say rounded will be large. And within this, now we want to be a little dynamic, so we'll go $, $, then brackets, and we'll say if the item dot purchased, purchased, is equal to yes, then we want the background color to be set to green. So go outside of yes, and we'll include a question mark, and we'll say BG green 500. And if it is not yes, then we want to display a red background, which will represent that we don't have the item, or that the item hasn't been purchased yet, and we would like someone to purchase it, or we just need to purchase it or keep it on the list. So we'll go red BG 500. We'll hit save, and then now inside of this, you see it's already set to no, so that's great. And it'll help if I set the text to center and not send. There we go. So now we just need to include the item dot purchased and hit save. Perfect. So it's showing no. So that works great. So now let's copy the table detail for item name, and underneath the closing table detail that was for purchase, let's add another detail there. And instead of it showing EE, which is the name, let's just remove the item name and add purchase. No, price, I'm sorry. Add price. Hit save. And I'm just going to add a $sign in front of it. Perfect. And then now the last thing that we want to do is add a section for, or table data for action. So with action, we know that we're going to need a couple of links, and we'll go ahead and work on building those now. The first one is going to be a link to the edit page. So we'll say we'll use the shortcut to bring in link, and we'll set the href to be the /edit/id, and we want that to be passed in dynamically, and the way we're going to do it is with temporal literals. So we'll use the temporal literals, /edit/$ with the brackets, and then we'll go item.id, and then we can add the closing link tag so that it's closed up. And let's add a little bit of styling to this link. First thing we want to do is set the text color to purple, and I think it is purple 500. And then on hover, we want to set the text to purple 700. Hit save. And for this, I want to have a edit icon. So I'm going to type in and remember, we can take the shortcut. We don't have to import it manually. We could just import it like this. ~fi edit, and I want to use the edit2, and we'll set the class name width to 4 and the height to 4, and close the icon out, and you'll see that we now have this icon listed there in the screen. And then the next item that I want to add is a button. So the button is going to be to delete, and we haven't created the delete function yet, but we'll go ahead and just add the button. So underneath the closing link tag, let's just add a button, and I want to add in a FI trash icon and set the class name the exact same as the edit. Copied it, pasted it in, close out the trash can, hit save. We now see that we have the trash listed here on screen. So let's style it a little bit. Let's add a class name of, let's go with text of red, and we'll keep it 500. And we'll set the hover to text red 700. And hit save. So now it looks a little wonky, out of whack. Let's clean that up a little bit. In the last table detail, let's add a flex. Make this a flex box, and we'll set items to be centered. And then we'll say justify center. and then we'll say space on the X of 3. And then now the table looks a little off. Let me set let's try pattern on 3. Let's try 4. I'm gonna come back to that. I'm gonna keep it at 3 for right now. Come back to that. I'm thinking once I style it and I add in a little bit more, that should take care of how this is kind of off-centered just a little bit. But nevertheless, we'll clean that portion up in a little bit. But the good thing is we are displaying the table data now, where before we were having issues. So let's add another item. So I'm gonna add TV or Samsung TV, 65-inch new TV for the living room. What's the cost? We'll call it $600, and we'll get it from Best Buy. Now we'll get this one from Amazon. And is it purchased? We'll say no. Add item. We get redirected, and we see the item is now listed here on screen. That's perfect. So with that, now we are ready to, let's go back and fix the search feature since we have more than one option now. So remember, the reason we weren't getting the information before, for whatever reason, the prop wasn't working, but we've adjusted. So now let's go back and add in the search query capability. So I'm going to pass in the query into the get wish list function, and then I'm gonna go back to data. Let's uncomment the search query, and then defined, let's pass in search query, hit save, and it is saying the query is not defined. Where do we have it? Oh, got to pass it in right here. Remember, the other thing we needed to do was pass it in as a prop, and I believe this is query. This is query is equal to an empty string, because that's what it starts out with. Perfect. All right. So now, now that we have the server action updated to capture the query, and we are able to send it from the front end, and we can remove this table body. Let's go ahead and update the search input so that we can utilize that functionality and test it out, make sure it works, and then we'll take care of edit and delete, and we will be all set. So in components, go to the UI, click on search bar. And what we want to do now is begin to update the search bar. So before we update the search bar, we need to make sure we have the ability to manage the querying that is done to the database. This is a small project, so it is not it's not necessary, if you will, for this project. But for larger scale projects, you want to make sure that you're managing how frequently you're making API calls to your database, because the more users you have and the more interactivity you have on your page, that's just adding more workload to the server and to begin to bog things down, and things won't work properly. So let's just go ahead and update this now. So within this search bar component, the first thing we want to do is add in a hook library named use the bounce. So I am going to remove that. I think it just pasted in. So we'll go into a empty terminal, and we'll type in the command npm I use -de bounce and press enter. And I want to go back to my main terminal, and since we see the data now, I'm just going to close, I'm going to remove the console.log from the database or from the server. Actually, I'm going to remove it, not comment it out. And I'm also going to remove it from the page.js. So now we only see the compile statement back from React. So within the search bar, we're going to need a few files. We're going to need to import, use the bounce first. So at the top, let's go ahead and import use the bounce from use the bounce. We'll also want to capture use search params. This is from Next Navigation. Use path name, and use router. All of these are from Next Navigation. And basically what they're going to do is the search param is going to allow us to search by the parameters that we're entering. The path name is going to help us identify the path name, the site, or the path URL that we're on. And the use router, we're going to capture replace so that we are updating the information dynamically as we are replacing that information and making queries to the database. So let's go ahead and work on that now. So within the search bar function, let's start with a const named search params, P-A-R-A-M-S, and set it equal to use search params, and be sure to call it. Then we'll create a const named path name, and be sure to set it equal to use path name and include the curly brackets or parentheses, and then we'll say const replace is equal to use router, and be sure to call it. And I'm gonna make this lowercase, that way I don't get confused and there's no typing inaccuracies. So the way this works is very simple. We just need to create a function that will utilize the use the bounce callback. We'll pass in a term, and then we just want to create a variable named params so that we can pass in those params as a string, and then we want to set the timeout of the search so that it doesn't immediately search after every input from the user. It only searches after that user has completed, and it gives it about 300 milliseconds. So we'll start by creating a const named handle search, and we'll set it equal to use the bounce callback, and we want to pass in a term, and you can make that anything you like. Term just made the most sense to me. And then we will complete out the const. Be sure that you're using the curly brackets. I know earlier or quite a bit we used the parentheses, but for this one, because it's a handle search, because of the type of function we're passing, we're using parentheses, we're using the brackets and not parentheses. So first we'll need to capture the params, and we're going to set it equal to new URL, and this should be URL search params. There it is right there. And what we want to do is pass in the search params, and this is going to be captured from the user. Underneath it, we want to say params.set, and we want to set the page. Well, we want to pass in two arguments. The first one is going to be page, and the second one is going to be the letter, the number one, not I, the number one. And it will say if the term, and it will pass that in. If the term, will say params dot set, and it will set the query, and the second argument will be the term. And if it's not, we'll say else. Of course, anytime we have an if, we want to include an else statement. For the most part, we want to delete the query that we're sending to the database, so it's not just stuck, it's actually mirroring the input from the user. And then underneath that if else statement, we want to type in a little more code here. Type in replace, and we want to replace the path name. So we'll go temporal literals because we got to pass in the path name, and that's going to be dynamic. So we'll add those temporal literals there, pass in the $. We'll say path name. And then after the closing curly bracket, add a question mark, and then another $, with more brackets. We'll say params, and we want to make this to a string. Hit save. And then right after the last closing bracket, we want to pass in the amount of time that we want to pass by or for it to take. I'm just going to set mine to 300. Feel free to set yours to whatever you like. Perfect. So now the last thing we'll need to do is to pass in these functions within the, or as a on-change handler within our input. So within the input underneath the class name, just add on-change, and we want to capture the event, and we'll pass the handle search function that we created, and the term that we are passing into is right there. It's going to be e.target.value. And press enter so it is there. Beautiful. And then the default value, not default check, default value, we want to pass in search params.get a query, and come outside of that bracket, and query.toString, and hit save. So now let's check it out. We hit EE. We see we only get the one that begins with E, and then it disappears. We hit SAM, and then when we hit delete, it deletes, it resets, and it deletes. And you notice it is taking a little, it's taking a little bit of time. It's not immediate. Excuse me. That is because we just want to make sure the user is finished typing before we begin our search, or at least there's some delay in the typing, so it's not immediate. Otherwise, you'll overload the server as the database or as the front end continues to grow. Perfect. So now that cares for the search bar. All we need to do now is add the ability to edit and delete our wish list items, and our full CRUD functionality will be 100% complete. So let's take care of edit first. So we know that we already have a route set up of edit slash, I don't know if you can see it at the bottom here, but if you look at the bottom of my local host, you'll see that we already have a route set up of edit slash the ID of this item. So what we need to do is create the route within the front end so that we can display the information. So we kept the edit folder from earlier, which is inside of the organizational website directory. Let's just add a folder named bracket, open bracket, excuse me, ID, close bracket. And then in it, let's add a file named page.js. So this particular file is going to handle it's going to have the ability to update. Number one, it's going to have the ability to get the item by the ID that is being sent from the link. And then it's going to also capture it, use the form that we created. And if the user wants to make any changes, the user will have the ability to do so within this page. Otherwise, they'll just be able to see the description and use it however they see fit. So the first thing I want to do is add an import of React. And let's go ahead and create the const edit item page to make sure that the routing is correct. We'll go async. And let's just go ahead and pass in the params. We're not going to use it just yet. We'll use it in a moment. Complete out the arrow function, and then let's go export default edit page. Click save. Let's go return. Actually, I lied. Let's go return div. Let's kill two birds, one stone. Let's go ahead and say const ID is equal to params, and then let's just pass in the ID. Hit save. If we click on the link, it redirects us, and you see we're getting the ID of that item that we just clicked on, and this one ends in F3880. If we go to the database and just refresh it, sorry, you'll see that we have F3880 in the database. Great, and that's the Samsung wish list item that we added. So let's go back to the page, the item page, and we can remove the div. Let's style it first, and then we'll work on the functionality. Let's add the page wrapper that we created earlier. Let's add the page text, and we're taking the shorthand approach. And let's just set the text to edit your, or we can go update your wish list item, and close it out and hit save. You'll see that we have the page text, which gives us the ability to go back home. If we click on it, works perfectly. And if we click on edit, I'm just going to the EE item that we created so that we can update it. Excuse me. So now what I want to do is I want to use the form that we already created and leverage it to help us update this information. But before we use the form, we need to have a way to get this particular item by the ID that we destructured from the database. So we can do so by going to the data file and creating a function that'll give us that capability to get the item by its ID. So let's create an export const named get item by ID. And we'll set it equal to async because we know that this is going to take some time. We'll be passing in an ID or sending it an ID that it will use to look up the item. And inside of this, of course, we need a try catch block. Let me close that ICC a little better. And we'll go db.connect. Then we'll say const get item. And we're going to say await wishlist dot find by ID. And we'll pass in the ID. And then we'll return get item. If we get an error, we actually can just copy this exact same thing. And then failed to get wish list item. Hit save. Now we have the ability to use that function. Let's just make sure that it works. So the way we can just make sure it works really quick, we'll say const wish item is equal to get wish. And as you begin to type it in, the IntelliSense is going to pick up that we have a function in the lib directory. You're going to utilize it or click on it so that it imports it. And remember, we passed in a ID. So let's go ahead and pass in a ID to get it. So we can go with, since we already destructured it, we can just go with ID. And then now, just to see it on the screen, let's go with wishlist.item name. And it is not getting my wish list item. Hold on a second. Okay. And then let me go with. Tell you what, let's do it like this. We'll remove that constant. We'll go let item will equal null, and then let's do it like this. If there's a params.id, we'll set the item to equal await. Then we'll use the get. Hold on. Await get wish list item, and we're going to get it by the params.id. Hit save. Now we'll say item.item name, and it is not showing. Let's see, because it say get wish list versus wish list item. So that's what I get for taking advantage of the shortcut. Sorry. What do we name this thing? We named it get item by ID. Get item by ID. Save. Now we see the EE on the page. Great. So we know that we can get the wish list item. Now we just need the ability to update said item and display it on the screen within the form. So the cool thing is we already have the form created. We just need to make one slight modification to it in order to take advantage of the dynamic capability that we have with it. So what we want to do is go back to our root directory and close some of these out. Click on the components folder, click on input, and for each of the for the input field, select and text area, we just need to make one additional adjustment. Let's just pass in item, and we're going to set the default value to item, and we can close out form input. Let's go to form select, and we'll need to do the same thing with this. So what we want to do with the select, this one's going to be a little different. We'll set the, at the options, we're going to pass in the default value and an item. And then for the select, or inside of select, underneath name, we're going to set the default value to default value. That way we'll automatically see what the value already is. And then for the item, as we want to update it, we'll say item is equal to, item. Hit save. That cares for the select. Last but certainly not least is the text input. And this one is going to be very similar to what we did for the regular input for the text area. That's what we'll need to do. We'll just need to do item, and then we'll set the default value to item. And I think I said item with this one, just to be consistent. Either way, it'll be fine. But go back to form input, and okay, I did do that one. I thought I said item, but I could be tripping. Maybe I am. All right, so we can close that out. We can close the data get by ID out, close the text area out. We should be good with it, but if not, of course, we'll go right back to it. And then now let's go to our edit page and start by bringing in the form UI so we can manage the layout. And remember, the key with the form UI, we passed in a action prop. And now what we want to do is create the ability to update this item based upon what we found. So if we go to the action.js file, which is inside of the lib directory, inside of the root folder, this is the file that stores our actions, and we do need to create a action of update. So we'll go export const update wish item, and we'll set it equal to async, and of course we'll pass in form data. And within this, we can actually copy the destructuring of the object, because that's going to remain the same. And then we'll add a try catch block, very similar to what we've already done numerous times. We'll go db.connect, and then we'll say const update fields is equal to the hold on, sorry, there we go. It's equal to a bracket, and what we want to pass in is the items listed here. So instead of typing them out, see if we can control the typos a little bit. I'm just going to pass them in like that, and then underneath the closing bracket, we want to say object dot keys. We'll say update fields, which is this variable, and we'll say dot for each. We'll pass in key, then come outside of that parentheses, and then we'll say update fields, and then we'll have the curly braces, and we'll pass key, and we'll set if it's equal to an empty string, or it can be undefined. And then outside of that parentheses, we'll say add delete. Oh, let me type it in, delete. Update fields. And I think with this one, we just need to do key. There we go. Update fields, update fields. Yep, looks good. Now, after that particular line of code, which is basically just iterating over the keys for each one, it's going to update the fields and either set it to an empty string, which is keeping it blank, or deleting the field so that we can update it. And then underneath it, we'll say await. And we want to use that wish list model that we already have imported. We'll say find by ID and update. And of course, we're going to pass in the ID and update fields. And then we'll copy the same console.log that we had for the create. And we'll just say update item error failed to update wish list item. And then be sure to include the revalidate. And I think for this one, yep, and revalidate and redirect. Hit save. Okay, so provided we didn't type any arrows, meaning me again, that should work perfectly fine. So now let's go back to the edit page and let's pass in the action that we just created. And I think we named it update wish list item. Yep, from the lib directory. And then the first thing we want to do to make sure that we don't forget this is we have to pass in the ID. There's a few ways that you could have did it. I'm going to choose to do a input. So we'll say input, and I want to hide this. The user doesn't necessarily need to see it. The ID is going to be ID. The name of this is going to be ID, and the default value is going to be set to item.id. And we'll close that out. Okay. And then now within this form, we want to add the exact same styling we had before, excuse me. So we'll say div class name, and actually, instead of typing this again, let's just go to the create page and just copy the div class name, any of them that have the grid layout. That's ultimately what we want to update. And then we'll just go back to the page that we were previously on, paste it in. That should care for that. And then now within this div, we need to just add in the form so that we can see the information. So the first form input is going to be for the name. So we'll say item is equal to item.item name. Then we'll say name is equal to item name, ITEM name. Remember, that has to match what's in the database. And I just went ahead and saved it so we can stop getting the error, and you can see it is already dynamically displayed on the screen, which is perfect. We'll set the text to text. Well, excuse me, not the text. We'll set the type to text. We'll set a placeholder. I know we already have it here, but I'll just keep it consistent. Item.item name. Actually, you know what? We don't need the placeholder because it's already listed there. But what we do need is, let's add a label. And then this label is going to be item name, and it should be purple. Yep. And I think that's all we need. We have the name, we have the item. Shouldn't need the placeholder. I'm gonna add required to this one. Don't necessarily have to because it's gonna automatically check for it. And I think next we had the form text area. Go ahead and add the closing bracket for it. We'll set the ID to description. Then we'll set the name to description. If we hit save, the ID was description. The item will be item.description. Okay. The label will be description. And I think the rows we set to 4. There we go. All right, perfect. So let's go ahead and copy this div with the class name again. And underneath this closing div, let's add another div and paste in the code we just copied. And then now we'll need the form input for the price and the purchase. So we'll say form input. Go ahead and close it. We'll set the ID to price. Set the name to price. We'll set the label to price. You guessed it. We'll set the item to item.price. Perfect. And that should take care of that. Now we need the one for the purchase. So we'll say form input. ID will be purchase. CHASCD. The name will be purchase. Yep. Label will be purchase. All right, and we see we now have it displayed on the screen, and we can set the item to item.purchase. PRCHASCD. Okay, give me just a second here. Sorry about that. Someone was at my door. So that's going to take care of purchased. And do I want it like this? Actually, I set this one wrong. This should be form inputs. This should be form inputs. This should be for the purchase URL. Forgive me. Been a while, everyone. I'm sorry. Purchased, and it's no D on that one. I don't think URL. Close it. We'll say name, purchase, URL. Hit save. Label will be purchase URL, and set the item to item.purchase URL. Hit save. Okay. All right. And outside of that div, let's just add in the form select. Go ahead and close it. And we're going to need to pass in some information to this, of course. So we'll say the ID is going to be purchased. CHASCD. The name will be purchased. PRCHASCD. PU, and this has to be, I'm tripping. This has to be lowercase. Let me just make sure I type that in correctly. I'm just going to copy it. There we go. And hit save. I know we need to pass in the options, so we'll go ahead and grab those now. And we can just, instead of retyping them in, just go to the create page. The options are going to be the exact same. Just copy those options. You can close it out. And under the input, you can actually just replace what you just typed. Now paste it in. Excuse me. We'll see we have the options listed there, but what we want is the default value displayed. So we'll say default value, then we'll go item.purchased. Hit save. And we'll go item.purchased. hit save, and put the label as purchase. Okay. And add that there. Okay. And let's go back to the select really quick. Inside of components, form select. Let me take a look at this because the name, the item, the default value. Oh, I need to update the I'm gonna need to update the select field to display the default value as well. So I think we can go value right here if I remember correctly. Let's go option.value, hit save. Okay. And close it out. And then let's add in a button, and we'll need to go inside of that. We'll go button. And I'm gonna use the exact same styling update item that we have for the create. So we'll go back to the create page, and I'm gonna copy this class name, close this out, include this class name, and add a type of submit. Hit enter. All right, so let's just update this and see if it works. So I'm going to say a wish list item, maybe a microphone, a new mic to record while coding. And this will be, I don't know, 90 bucks. And of course, good old Amazon. And we'll say no. And we got an error. So let's go to see what we got. ID is not defined. So we need the ID. We need to define the ID. And it should be right here. Let me move this to right here. Remove that. And I'm not missing anything from this. We have the default value, the name, the ID. All right. And let me make sure, hold on, because I think you know what? We didn't pass it now that I think about it. Be sure to pass it from, when you copy it in from the update field, it's probably why I should type everything out. But when you copy it from the update field or from the create list function, add the ID. That's the reason it wasn't working, because it wasn't being passed. So we'll say, we'll just call this a LG headset, a new headset to record videos. And then we'll change the price to 80. The URL will be amazon.com. We'll set the purchase to no, hit update. And there it is. So now let's make sure this conditional render works. And we see that the default is selected now. So we'll say yes, that we purchased it. And we see it is now showing yes conditionally. Perfect. So the last thing we need to do is create a function to delete a wish list item. So in the action folder, which is inside of the lib directory, let's add a export const named delete wish item. And we're going to set it equal to async. Let's pass in some form data. And we'll just go const ID. It's going to be equal to object.form entries. And of course, the form entries is the form data that we're getting. And this one is actually very simple. We'll just do a try catch block. We'll go DB connect because we have to have a connection to the database. And then we'll say await, and we'll need to grab that model. And we'll say find by ID and delete a method from Mongoose. We don't have to return anything, but we do want to throw a new error. Throw new error. In the event we get an error, failed to delete wish item. Because I have been a little rusty with my coding and have been making a few little silly mistakes here and there. My apologies. And then we'll revalidate the path, and we want to revalidate it and send it, revalidating the home page. You don't have to redirect because the delete icon is already on the home page itself. So provided I didn't make any errors, which it doesn't appear I did, if we go back to and we can close out the edit page. If we go back to the main page.js, we'll need to make a couple slight modifications. Since we're already at the top of the file, let's just go ahead and import the function that we'll need, or that we just created to delete the item. So we'll go import delete wishlist item, and that action is coming from Mongoose. And if we scroll down to the table body portion where the button is currently located, let's go ahead and highlight that button, copy it, delete it, and now instead of it, let's add a form. And we can actually go ahead and paste in that button so we don't accidentally delete it. The first thing inside of this form we need to do is pass in an action. And the action that we want to pass in is the delete wish item that we just created. We can go ahead and add a little bit of styling. We'll go class name of inline, and let's just hit save. Okay. And then we'll need to pass in the inputs with an ID hidden the same way we did for the edit feature. So we'll say hidden name of ID, ID is equal to ID with a closing tag, hit save. And actually we got to give it a value, sorry. So we'll say value of ID. Now let's hit save. Yeah, it should be I think it is item.id. Yeah, and this should be default value. Let's look. Yeah, I think so. Hold on. Let's remove value. So instead of it saying value, do default value. Sorry. And that fixes the errors that you can see down here. So now let's just test it out to see if it works. And you see it works. Hit delete it. Let's add another item. What's a wish list item? We'll say a new suit for church. Need a new shirt and tie for service. And what's the cost of it? It's probably about $150. And I think I'll just put, we have a local store named Ruben in my area that I'm just going to put Ruben, not Rudun, Ruben.com. And if it is purchased, we'll say, no, I hadn't purchased it yet. Hit add item. And now we see the new suit. And I got a little excited. Let's just say I went ahead and purchased that TV, updated it. Boom. You see the TV is updated. And just for giggles, to make sure, let's just check our database. And you see the TV is purchased. And we have a new suit in the database. So there you have it. A simple CRUD application using the latest version of Nextjs, MongoDB, and Mongoose to interact with the Mongoose to interact with the MongoDB database. Look, I hope you enjoyed today's video. I know it was a little longer than anticipated, and I had a few stumbling blocks. It's been a while since I've done a live stream code, but I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, look, feel free to give me a like. I genuinely appreciate it. Consider subscribing to support the channel's growth. Otherwise, I will see you in the next video. Any suggestions or comments or ideas, leave them in the comments. I love to interact and get your feedback. But otherwise, I'll see you in the next video. Love you, man.